allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This meeting of the East Troy School District Board of Education and all other meetings of the board are open to the public in compliance with state statute. Notice of the meeting has been sent to the media and or has been publicly posted in an attempt to make the citizens of the district aware of the time, place, and agenda of this meeting.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda as posted.
I'll second.
Any discussions on the agenda? Okay. All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Public participation. Just want to make everybody aware this is a time for public to express any thoughts they may have. But we also want to just say that there's not going to be any back and forth dialogue with the board or administration. It's really just to say your thoughts on any of the items on the agenda or really any topic. We do have 5 people that have signed up. So I'll go down the list. Tony, Barrett.
All right, I'm Tony Barrett, community member, business owner, parent in the district here. I just wanted to say a couple words about a topic that I sensed over the last month that seems to be missing. I wish it was more upfront and active right now, and it's empathy and understanding. I'm not the best with putting great words together, but I read something a couple weeks ago in East Troy Times that I just wanted to share. That kind of hits the point for me. It's written by a fellow citizen here, Peter Kesselhan of East Troy. Opinions, 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 one on top of the other with no consensus. It sounds like the world we live in, doesn't it? Emotionally charged and quick to judge. You're wrong, I'm right. We paint the world black and white, but the problem is the world is gray. Accept the paradoxes and contradictions thrown your way. There is no choice. I ask, how many of your conversations are discussions? Or are they unsolicited rants? Quite a difference. A rant is venting of emotion with little rationale. Closed-minded and one-sided, ignoring the other's point of view. A discussion is irrational and open-minded while entertaining the other's point of view with empathy. The paradox. We want to invoke our opinion on others so they believe what we believe, but we don't want them to do the same to us. I ask, why do we want to change how others think and live their lives? And why do we think they should live a certain way and not another? Much of what we believe is hearsay. The source of knowledge is dubious. Maybe a time to suspend judgment and be silent. Civil we must be, accept others as different. We don't have to impose our will on others. Live and let live. Let's respect one another, educate one another, and demonstrate to one another empathy. Coercion never works. Change the heart and you change the mind. And I just want our community to keep in mind that it's going to take all of us working together through these trying times and understanding that there's a lot of different things going on with different people, and we need each other for all this. So that's all I have to say.
All said. Thank you, Tony. I'll try to read some of these names. David Banks, I believe it is.
A little nervous. I don't speak in public often, but I'm a resident. My name is David Banks. I've lived here for 6 years, and I gave a lot of thought. I came last week, and while I may not have the greatest poker face about things I feel passionate about, or I took a step back. I spoke with some friends. I spoke with family. I spoke with people that I knew, and I tried to kind of widen my perspective a bit. And ironically, Tony just kind of echoed many of the things that I'm thinking inside. And I thought, if I go here and bring up these ideas that I'm passionate about or something that I may or may not agree with, all it does is detract your focus. And I recognize, and I think it's something that we all have an opportunity to do, and that's look at what's the fundamental goal of probably why we're all doing these meetings as often as you probably have been. I've only seen a handful of hours, but I have to say I have got the utmost respect and admiration for all of you sitting up here on your time. It's your choice. And I realize, you're employed, Dr. Hibner, but still, it's a choice. You have a choice to be here. You have a choice to teach here. We have a choice to go to these schools. And I recognize that we're not all going to, it's unlikely any one of us is going to agree on everything, but that's okay, because we've all been dealt the same deck here, and that is a circumstance that is just crazy. I was hoping, and this is a good turnout, I guess, from what I've seen in the past, but I hope that anybody that's watching or currently or is here, to engage in discussions and talk about what Tony just mentioned. I had no idea that he was going to say the things he did, but I was kind of pleasantly surprised that we recognize the sacrifice, your time commitment, and that we just show some appreciation, and that we show this for the kids because we have one unified goal. And that's the thing is, there is one unified goal. No matter how fractured we might be on any given topic or option for getting the kids back in school, that spending time on that is going to fraction attention that's really about the kids' education, their futures, and we want to provide a solid education for them. So, thank you.
Thank you, David.
Next one, sorry I can't read your first name, Mr. Roberts? Micah.
Yeah, thanks for giving us the opportunity to voice our concerns and other ideas, thoughts that we have. And I thank you all for your working on this. And wasn't able to make the meeting last week, which I wish I could have. But just in that, I just am commenting on especially reopening of the schools. And I don't know what your approach is, but I'm sure it's a student-first approach where it's putting the students first, their education as a top priority. This young people in our district here can't go without school. They need to have school every day of the week, 5 days a week. And school is about preparing young people for the next phase in life. And we need to be teaching them math, history, back to the basics, all those things. And they need to have school open and full. And I think a lot of parents would re-up with that. I know I was just talking, or someone told me about what a parent said. They have a special needs child in the East Troy School District, and she said they need school. These, especially the special education, they need to be in school. They need an interaction with their teachers, with one another as students. And that doesn't just go for special needs students, it goes for all students. And as we look at the reopening of schools, children are the least at risk in all of this. So I don't think that we should use the students' health as a reason to shut the schools down or keep them shut down or only open them 4 days a week. They need to be in the classrooms learning. If they're not, obviously, in some other school or homeschool, they need to be here at school. And we must keep our focus on education. I know sometimes it's easy to have our own agendas in teaching students, but we need to make sure we focus. This is kind of a side issue, but along with it, we need to make sure we're teaching them history, the history of our nation. We should not be introducing other topics into our history that would somehow erase our history. We need to learn from history. And I've heard of curriculums that are going to be brought into certain school districts that would seek to promote certain, I guess, political agendas. We shouldn't have that in our school district. We just need to keep it to the basics, teach the history, teach the facts, especially in regards to history. I don't know if this was discussed at all with masks or no masks. I really don't think that we should require all our students to wear masks. That's, first of all, it's not very ideal. And, I mean, kids would be touching their mask all the time, moving them around, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not if it was a guaranteed thing, then that might be a little bit different, but there's so many other ways that you can get the virus through your eyes, touching things. And so I just feel like masks would be a bad idea, would hurt physically, because obviously there's other ramifications where you have your own carbon dioxide that you're breathing in, other things like that. So I don't even know if that's something that's been discussed, but that's just my personal thought on that. And many of the masks actually only reduce by like 3%, unless you're wearing an N95 mask, which completely eliminates airflow coming out of the sides or tops. So I just want to encourage us to open the schools back up. Even if we did a 4-day-a-week program and we used 1 day to clean, that doesn't really make sense to me because the students, the other 2 days, are interacting with one another. And even if you use that 1 day to clean, what about the other 2 days? So that approach doesn't really make logical sense to me. Even if we did half the class in the classroom this day and half the next day, that too doesn't totally make sense because they're interacting with one another. So I've heard these things thrown out there, and so I just thought I'd give my own concerns. I think we just need to open up normally, fully, maybe take some extra precautions with cleaning, things like that. But I just feel like we need to open up fully in the best interests of our students.
Thank you, Micah. Tricia Harris.
I'll retract that. Everything's been covered. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Tricia. Kevin Bond.
Thank you. Thanks already for giving me a few minutes. Kevin Bond, I have 4 kids in the district. I also went to the school. So I'm here because it sounds like there's still a debate if masks would be required when if students come back physically in the fall. You know, I often see East Troy, you know, talking about the fact how much they work to teach students to be leaders. And Tony talked about empathy. You know, as a healthy person, wearing a mask demonstrates compassion and empathy for those people who have underlying conditions, who are at more risk if they get coronavirus or other diseases or things like that. And it seems crazy to me that we wouldn't work to teach our students in the school that compassion, that empathy for their peer students, to show them that we should be doing good for society and not just ourselves. You know, I think some of the arguments against the mask, I had heard that there was maybe we couldn't legally enforce it or wouldn't be able to enforce it. You know, certainly the school handbook says that shirts must cover the midriff area. If we can enforce that my kids can't see belly buttons, we can enforce that my kids can wear masks, and all the kids can wear masks. Like, any argument that we can't enforce it doesn't hold water. Lake Geneva School Board last night voted that when students come back in the fall, all students must wear masks. So any arguments that we can't legal enforcement, tell me why they can and we can't. It doesn't hold any water. The end result of making masks optional, either way you decide, you're going to exclude one group of students who can't come to school or won't come to school. If you decide that masks are optional, well, if you decide that masks are mandatory, the group you exclude is the students who refuse to come to school if they have to wear a mask. So the students who are ignoring what everybody's saying that should be done to stop the virus, being selfish, you know, those are the students you're excluding. And they're making a choice for themselves that only impacts others if they come to school and cause dangerous actions. On the other hand, if you choose to make masks optional, you're excluding students who choose not to come to school unless everyone wears a mask, or students who can't come to school unless anyone wears a mask, like those with underlying conditions, like a lot of the special needs students that were mentioned. One of those is, again, just people who are being selfish. The other one are, you know, shows a lack of compassion if you're not going to allow those people to come to school because some students shouldn't have to wear a mask. And it might even be, in my opinion, an ADA violation if you're making a decision that excludes people with underlying medical conditions from being able to come to school. You know, it just seems to me so much of the information that people are spouting about why masks shouldn't be worn just don't hold water. It doesn't hurt, it doesn't cause any health issues, it helps your health. Surgeons wear it all day long in surgery. There's hundreds of jobs that people have where they wear a mask all day long. It just doesn't make sense to say that we can't make our kids wear masks all day long in school. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. That's all I have on my list tonight. Is there anybody else that would like to speak?
I will. I guess I just wanted to offer perspective, not a strong opinion anyway, but in regards to kind of opening up, I have some experience with my work. I've been privileged in being allowed to work all of the COVID sites in Walworth County. So I get to interview people in their cars after they've been in their cars for 3 hours waiting to be tested, and asking them questions in regards to if they have symptoms, if they've traveled, and all of these different questions that the public health department then collects. And we put out all of this data from those questions that we collect. And I guess I just wanted to offer the perspective of watching so many people coming through those lines to be tested who are experiencing no symptoms. And so I know a lot of the focus, I watched most of the last meeting, and a lot of that focus seemed to be on cleaning. And we talked about cleaning surfaces, and we talked about HVAC and all of these different things. And so I just wanted to again just put out there that there are a ton of people without symptoms, and a lot of those people that are coming back positive, they're not coughing and sneezing and all of those things. And so cleaning a surface isn't the best way to stop those carriers of the virus from spreading that virus. And this gentleman shared how students aren't the most at risk. They have a small risk, but the students go somewhere after school and before school and on weekends. And so I think if we go along the lines of empathy and thinking about other people, and we know that there are tons of asymptomatic people carrying this virus that can be lethal for other people, that we should focus on the decisions that we can make that can stop the virus from spreading in the air. I know that I've worn masks. I've worn an N95 for 8 hours. I've worn cloth masks. I've done a lot of different things, and at first it was a little uncomfortable, but you get used to it. It's just one of those things that you get used to. I mean, at the COVID sites where we look like we're walking on the planet Mars with shields and all of this getup, and it's not for nothing, because the people going through those sites potentially have this virus. And so if we're looking to protect the community and keep the kids safe, then I think we should do what we can. And one of the things we can do is wearing masks and protecting that air exchange.
Thank you, Tracy. Anybody else like to speak tonight? Okay. We'll move on to the discussion action items. First one is discussion and consideration of approval of reentry plan for the 2021 school year. I'd like to turn it over to Chris for any additional information on what we had last week.
Yeah, so we had at the last meeting, special meeting, I think it was special meeting last Tuesday, we went over the re-entry proposal and went through the 4 operational considerations, went through the family survey results, and shared an unbelievable amount of information, 51 pages to be precise, I believe, in the end. Even though it might have only equated to 39 on paper, it's 51 altogether. So it's a lot. And it's a lot to take in for the board, so I'm sure they spent a great deal of time, and honestly, well deserved. With that being said, I would like to go over a few things due to the fact in the last week, just as you have been reviewing the plan in the reentry, and probably have gotten a lot of feedback, I would imagine, in a lot of different venues from people, so have we. And also, we've just had ongoing dialogue and discussion, right? So we have a few things that we'd like to bring forth for consideration in revising the plan slightly, not majorly, but again, just for you guys to know what we would like to have as considerations for revisions too. And then also, we want to go over the staff survey, because that has been done since then, and that also contributes to some of our conclusions and revisions and, direction. So those are the balancing acts. So if I can just spend a brief moment of time and state, so our commitments originally, and they stay our commitments, were safety, and when I say safety, keeping students and staff as physically safe and emotionally healthy by taking actions to reduce exposure and mitigate spread of the virus. In addition, following any requirements expected of the school district. Learning. Continue to increase empowered learners in learning, high academic achievement, equitable access, and practices/systems that support the learning of each child. Equity. Ensuring access and equity for all students towards support of the learning. Adaptability. Ensuring flexibility to meet the social, emotional, and learning needs of all students while addressing safety and maintaining affordability. Parent community feedback, recognizing the various opinions. And communication. Communicating often and clearly with staff, families, and community. And what I would add on the parent community feedback is parent community staff feedback and recognizing the various opinions. We had 4 operational considerations. I won't go through each one of them again. We've gone through them at length. But our objective, I would like to state again, our objective when we began, I wouldn't even say began the process, but began working through the process is probably a better way to state it. We ultimately got to the objective of creating proposals with specific actions that help to reduce exposure and mitigate spread, while also providing learning environments that support the psychological and physiological health of our students. And I think that objective is very important. It's broad. There's a lot there. And there's a balance. If you really listen to that objective, there's a balance there of what we're trying to accomplish. And I think there's great debate on many spectrums about that objective, about psychologically, physiologically, and trying to balance that safety component of each. And I think there's a lot of debate. I do not pretend to sit up here and tell you this is the way it should be done, and it's the only way that could be done, and without doing it that way, there cannot be any other success. I am not conceited enough to believe that, and I am very humbled in regards to what we have been doing for the last 5 months to realize that there is no clear-cut answer whatsoever. So with all that being said, since the last special meeting, as I stated, we received feedback from the employees, and I'm sure the board has received feedback from various other stakeholders and possibly employees themselves. I'd like to review those survey results of the employees, revisit the family survey results a little bit, so we have an understanding and a little bit of a nexus of the responses, and then I would like to go into a few of the recommended suggestions that we would like the board to consider under advisement in regards to the initial reentry plan that you received already from us. So the staff survey, a few of the things, I'm not going to go through it verbatim, but I would like to hit on a few of them. So there was a question in regards to the staff survey that stated, anyone in your household in a high-risk group for vulnerability to COVID-19 or other communicable diseases. At this point in time of the staff that responded, 20 had stated, yes, I am considered high risk. We had 23 employees that stated that they provide daily, weekly care for a member in their direct family that would be considered high risk. And we had 27 that stated that a family member is considered high risk. So obviously the last 2 questions could be very similar. It could be the same employee responding on that. But anyways, in a nutshell, what you're looking at is 20 plus employees considering themselves high risk. That has been stated. And or then obviously taking care of somebody directly or somebody within the family. We also gave the option on that question not to respond to it, which we did have people wish not to respond. What is your level of comfort with returning to learning with all students invited into the buildings? 18% of our staff stated they were very comfortable. 21.1% of our staff stated they were comfortable. 36.6% stated somewhat comfortable. And 24.2% stated not at all comfortable. So if doing the statistics a little bit there, and aggregating it, is 75.7% of our staff state that they are very comfortable, or somewhat comfortable in regards to coming back to our district to do the in-person. Given the additional safety and health measures in place, basically the ones that we've gone over last week in regards to the preventative or mitigation, I'd like to say more than preventative measures, how favorable are you regarding starting school as we typically would, as opposed to the other operational considerations? So as we typically would be the 5 days per week, as opposed to the other operational considerations. The other operational considerations were the hybrid model, which we went over last week in quite detail, which is about capacity more than anything else. We went over the full-time virtual and what that would look like and how it would be different than this past spring. And then obviously we have the intermittent virtual, which is more going to be utilized within any plan that's chosen by the board, unless it's a full-time virtual, is if we're being directed by the health department to close a building or district, that we go into the intermittent virtual plan for whatever period of time we would need to. Given that question, again, let me review it since I spoke a little bit there. Given the additional safety and health measures in place, how favorable are you regarding starting school, as we typically would, as opposed to the other operational considerations? 32.9% of the employees stated strongly favor. 26.7% stated somewhat favor. 26.1% stated somewhat opposed. And 14.3% stated strongly opposed. So 59.6% of our employees are stating that they are in favor in one way or another, strongly or somewhat, in regards to starting school typically, as opposed to the other operational. Now, I do want to stress this, right? So much is going to be about when the survey is being provided and what one feels and knows at that point in time, too, right? I mean, our staff, our family surveys were done 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago. So, I mean, that's one of the issues that a lot of, I think, districts are finding, right, is we could be doing daily surveys. And honestly, it could be changing daily how people are feeling. Same with, I would imagine, our staff surveys. If returning to in-person instruction, I believe staff should wear face coverings when physical distancing cannot be maintained. That's the question, all right? So that was the question. 88.8% agree. 11.2% disagree. If returning to in-person instruction, I believe staff should wear face coverings all of the time when in the presence of students or fellow staff, no matter if physical distancing can be maintained. 62.7% of our staff agree. 37.3% of our staff disagree with that question. If given the option, I would prefer students wear face coverings when physical distancing cannot be maintained. 79.5% agree with that and 20.5% disagree. How do you feel about students completing the school year in a totally online instructional environment, basically virtual learning as we've been calling it? Our staff stated, or our employees, I should say, stated, strongly opposed, 28.6%, somewhat opposed, 44.1%, somewhat favor, 18.6%, and strongly favor it, 8.7%. So 72.7% of our employees stated they are strongly opposed or somewhat opposed to virtual learning for our students. Totally virtual learning, I should say. After considering each operational consideration, which re-entry model do you prefer as an employee? All students in the building, 42.2% of the staff stated that they consider that their choice of operational considerations. The hybrid model, which is the AB model, and students coming in at different days, more for capacity issues. 42.2% of the staff prefer that. In the full-time virtual, 15.5%. So the all students in the building and hybrid model are 42.2 and 42.2 of our staff. A couple themes that came out of narratives that they provided at the end that I'd like to go over, and I mean, there's much more, so I'm not trying to minimize by any means, but some of the key themes were wanting clear direction, providing resources readily available when needed, whenever throughout the year, and being able, whatever we do, to adjust abruptly, very quickly, due to the fact of the changes that could have to happen. A few more things that were brought very forth that we thought were themes very clearly were absolutely wanting to implement procedures to help with safety as much as possible, and providing choices to students and families was an overlying theme. Health and safety of everyone was a huge theme, not just them, not just the students, but everybody. That was a huge thing. Still wanting to provide the best educational experience. It was clearly our employees are still saying, we want to provide the best educational experience. How do we do it? Being able to interact face-to-face with others, but without worrying of becoming or getting someone else sick or getting themselves sick is still a key premise. So wanting to interact face-to-face, but the concern of getting someone else sick or themselves. Safety for staff and students in schools, and then different situations of all students, families, and staff. So recognizing there's much different situations for each individual child, each individual staff member, and all the different families in our community, and and how are we addressing all those different situations for people. So those were some of the primary ones. I did appreciate, somebody wrote good luck. I did really, honestly, I appreciated that a lot. On the family one, just to remind people so they can have a comparison of stuff, if students are able to return to school in the fall following the CDC guidelines, would you send your child to school? 80.9% said yes. Even if students are able to return in the fall, I would prefer, or at least consider, virtual learning option instead of face-to-face instruction. 58.9% at the time of the survey had said no. 21.4% said yes. And obviously the rest, the 19.8, was undecided. Please indicate your level of concern. I think these are kind of important components. So number of proximity of students in transportation. And I'm going to just break this down. We asked them to mark not important, important, or very important. And I'm just going to give you the total here a little bit on a few things. So 294 people stated important or very important in regards to transportation, like wanting that to be highly considered, okay? Number or proximity of students in building at one time, 359 stated important or very important. Number of proximity of students during passing periods, that had the highest amount of all the bullet points, which was 374 families that stated important or very important. So the passing periods is a big component that I want to point out and have people really think about tonight. The passing periods was big. Distribution of lunch, 337 people stated important or very important. And requiring students to wear masks, from an important and very important, and as I stated, these are fluctuating, right? This was 3 weeks ago. At the time of important and very important was 293 people in regards to that. So off of that, where do we go from the staff and the families and all that? First of all, why don't we start with this, and that is, as I stated last week with the family responses, I want to state this week, and that is, I want to thank the staff for their responses. We had a high number of responses, and I appreciate their narratives, and I appreciate them taking the time. I also really appreciate the people in the narrative. I appreciate any of the narratives, but I really appreciate the narratives that were like, there is no easy decision. There is no decision that can accommodate all of the questions on the family survey and of the staff survey. There's just not a decision that will accommodate it all. And there isn't. There is not. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate the people who stated they appreciated having their voice heard from a standpoint of, we're providing you something. They understand the complexities, and when I say they, I think the people who have done the response on families, I think the people who have done the response on surveys, they understand the complexities to this, and they understand that a district, we're business. The district cannot come up with a plan that will meet every single individual's and family's needs. It's just not. It won't happen. It just will not happen because, as we stated last week, our employees have different needs, our families have different needs, And all of those needs honestly could change in 24-hour period for them, based upon what's happening in their life with their family dynamics. And that could happen based with COVID or not COVID. Obviously much more increasing with the current pandemic. But I think those are important. So the other thing I want to stress, and then I'm going to get to those couple points on the reentry. I think it's really important for us not to forget about mental health. Mental health. And I can't stress that enough. And I will tell you, this one I try not to get opinionated on. It's not my job to share opinions from Chris Hibner or Dr. Hibner. It's my job to share opinions from the superintendent's perspective. But I think I can do that from a superintendent's perspective with the data. And the data is demonstrating clearly we have mental health concerns amongst especially adolescents. We have for a while. We have greater mental health needs since March. And that's not my data. We've been in conferences and we've been viewing the data from UW Health and their health system, and people have been doing historical data for years, not just the last few months, in comparison. It's astonishing to me. It's scary, to be quite frank. It's data that I did not recognize as well as I thought I did. And what concerns me is obviously we have mental health with staff and we have families, but our students, our adolescents, I am nervous in regards to the strain that the current pandemic is placing upon them outside of already other mental health concerns we had. And well, I say that due to the fact I think the balance here is too, and it's part of our objective, health must be viewed as a very broad view right now. It cannot just be viewed as a safety, physiological view in regards to COVID alone. It has to be viewed from a physiological and psychological health view. It really does. And where I say with that is because it could be very tempting and easy to focus on one and do everything to your best of your abilities to focus on one and be detrimental to another one. And I don't have that answer. I don't have the magic wand. I don't have the balance, but I am saying that's why it's part of our objective, because those two have to be considered together. They really do, because as we do one, we could unintentionally be influencing and hurting the other. And so we've got to think about that. We do. And so I leave it with this, and then I get to the reentry. As educators and leaders, and I like to believe much beyond educators and leaders, our practice should always be dynamic and continuously making adjustments based on what we learn from research and data, quantitative, qualitative, families, students, and staff, right, responses. And that should always be done. I would like to believe that was always getting done. And I'd like to believe we always try to do that, even in regular times, if we could call them normal times. But I would say these aren't very unnormal times, right? Unusual times. And now more than ever, as leaders and educational leaders, we need to be adjusting all the time. And it kind of goes to what Tony said earlier. It will be getting adjusted all the time. I think adaptability better be a word that people really understand for quite some time. And I think it's a word that everybody should have represented, because I think it's an important word their whole life. But it's going to be needed more now than ever. And when I say that, I want people to understand we are not being reactive. We're trying to be responsive. There's a difference. There's a difference. There are times we're reactive, but we're trying our best not to be reactive. We're trying to be responsive, and there's a big difference in those definitions. So where I'd like to take the board is if you can, on your reentry plan that you were provided last week, and we went through all of this, so I just want people to know that it's not like a hidden secret. We went through all of it. But obviously it's a fluid document. So I've had some people ask, can we get that document on the webpage? At this point in time, we haven't done that, but the reason is it's a fluid document. It's always going to be fluid, understand, but we don't want to put it out there until the board's had a chance to mark it up really, really well. And then we'll be happy to put it back out there and say this is a fluid document, but we wanted this night to happen first before any of that happened. But on page 15, face coverings, if I can take you to that. page. And it is page 15, correct, for all of you?
Yep.
Okay. Face coverings. You'll notice last week when we presented, it said, it is recommended that school staff, transportation will have alternative requirements, which we're going to get to again tonight and talk about, be required to wear face coverings when students or staff are present. Additional protocols, I'm just reading what was presented last week first. Additional protocols for student face coverings will be developed closer to the start of the school with additional guidance from health professionals. At this time, until further guidance is received, the task force does not recommend requiring face coverings for students due to an inability to enforce. While mitigation will be used in various settings to the extent possible to reduce unintended exposure, there are instances and locations where physical distancing is challenging. Therefore, the task force strongly recommends face coverings be worn by students during the following. And then they bullet pointed some of the areas in which they think physical distancing might be difficult, and that's where it would be strongly recommended at that time. Let me address something very quickly, and that is to the gentleman who talked earlier. I appreciate you talking, sir. Thank you. In regards to, is it a law? It is not a law. Never has been stated by me that it's been a law. I've never heard any board member state that it was a law. Never heard anybody last week state it was a law. And I'm not saying maybe it has been in another district, but I would like to stay on the record. It's not a law at this time. So it's not a mandate. But the board, under our reentry plan, has every right to mandate it on everybody, make it a requirement, or not make it a requirement, or strongly recommend. So it's not a law. So I appreciate you stating that. I want you to know that we're not thinking that either. So there's nothing that does that. Now I will say, so even though we have the authority, one of the things that comes into play is if we require our employees to wear them, and we require our students to wear them, or different, right? Require employees, don't require students. Obviously, the interaction and the response is different, right? The response is different of how you respond to an employee if you're requiring it, and how you might respond to a student in requiring it. I mean, there's just different responses. They're an employee, this is a student, right? And I have yet, I mean, I'm putting this out there, but I have yet to hear, I'm not never saying never, I have yet to hear anybody saying, well, that's going to result in immediate, strong suspensions or expulsions. I think that's when districts are talking about it, sir, and they're saying about enforcing. I think that's what they're trying to work through on how much time do they want to spend on having to enforce something if so many kids were to not be wearing them. And then does it become a point of we're not even teaching, or our administrators aren't even able to do anything but enforce a mask, right? So that's the balance, I think, when people are talking about enforcing. And I think the other thing that people need to understand about it is, and again, we have, I think there'll be a lot of discussion on this tonight, is students and staff will have a right, if there's a medical condition or a religious reason that is provided, then that could allow them not to be, if we require to wear masks, that could allow them not to wear the mask. So I think there's that balancing act too, because somebody, if let's say we required it, and I'm not saying we aren't, but if we required it and people saw a child or a staff member or a group not wearing them, immediately people get offended, right? And they go, we're not doing the necessary job of implementing it. I think, I heard from a lawyer today, and I liked when he said it. He goes, people are going to really need to understand, and you need to understand too as superintendents, you're going to have to be very flexible in looking at things on case-by-case basis. You're going to have certain general requirements that I'm sure you're requiring or allowing, but he goes, you're going to need to help people to understand that everything has to be looked at a case-by-case, and you can't always reveal why a child was not wearing it or a staff member was not wearing it, or why it's required in maybe a staff member's room. Let's say if we said it was strongly encouraged but not required, but in the staff member's room, everybody's wearing them. That might have to do because of a child in that classroom, and we need everybody to wear it, or it might have to do because of the staff member and health condition. But we can't share that either, right? So there's that balancing act of having to look at things very case by case. But I really appreciate what you brought up, all of you, tonight. I appreciate it. But I hope that explains a little bit of it. And here's the other component that I think absolutely has to be discussed in one way or the other. If the district at all says, well, we're going to strongly recommend, strongly recommend is not required, right? Strongly recommend cannot be enforced. I'm going to be blunt. You can, again, strongly recommend. I can encourage, right? But it really can't be enforced. Like, we can't strongly recommend something and then later you say, Chris, we're going to need to raise the level of discipline because look how many people aren't doing it. I would respond going, no, we need to change the language then. Because I can't enforce anything, nor can the principals, nor can the teachers with a strongly recommend. You can't enforce that. I would also say, when people hear us talking about enforce, I'm gonna be direct here. Our first enforcement, if we were to ever go that route, would not be suspension, expulsion. I mean, you're talking about something that has never had to be done before for kids, right? Or to recommend to kids. But I do think people would hear, if this board elected to require masks and masks weren't being worn, there would be a lot of conversations with those families about, we're offering you a virtual. And we've decided as a district, this is the way we're operating. So you have an operation choice. It's either wear the mask or go virtual. And I think that's becoming very clearly evident that districts will have that right to do that if a district's requiring and one's not doing it. I'm not saying suspend or expel. I would never want to go there, but never say never, right? I mean, you don't know. But I think the point would be, you'd be trying to have a conversation about why we're doing what we're doing, and if still not changing, well then, here's another option. And this is an option for you. Now I say all that, and I'm not trying to push mask or optional masks or required masks at that time. Where I'm going with, like, okay, so you got us the face coverings, what are you guys recommending? Where we kind of got to, after looking at the surveys of the staff, still looking strongly at family responses, and knowing what's occurring, we stated this at this time. We said we'd like to change the verbiage within face coverings as it currently reads to, at this time, face coverings are encouraged, but required for all pupils when physical distancing cannot be implemented. So we're not saying strongly recommend when it can't be. No, we're saying when physical distancing cannot be done, face coverings will be required. Now, a good question by you, and you can ask that later and we'll let you talk to them. You might be like, well, can you tell us when that would kind of be? And I will redirect you all to the building level administration on that. Because, and I think you'll hear from them, they're working through that. Like, where are certain areas that might be, right? And I would ask, be flexible with them, that if that were to be approved, they need to have the flexibility to always be adjusting that, right? Like, here was their intent of where, let's say, zones where physical distancing they thought could happen, so masks are required, but they're noticing different zones where it can't happen, and they need to continually adjust that, right? They're gonna need that flexibility. So that's kind of where we made that change a little bit, and we're still saying face coverings are encouraged, but we did go to a change of saying required for pupils when physical distancing cannot be implemented, which would mean that we would want everybody to have a face covering at school, or we'd be providing them, obviously, because there's going to be places. And again, then it could look much different at each building, because let's be honest, every building is different. The capacity, the size of the kids, the schedule itself, and just the structure of the building. So that's the first one that we wanted to bring back up of a slight different proposal from last week. The second one would go to transportation. And I'm going to let Craig take this, and you can kind of probably imagine already, based upon what we just changed, how that now translates maybe to a change in transportation.
So last week, if you remember, I stated that on the school buses, we would be recommending or strongly recommending face coverings. So in light of what Dr. Hibner just shared with you, we would like to change that to required on all of our vehicles, not only buses, but our other transportation as well. That way, we can stay consistent with the school district. That's obviously an area, like I explained last week, that we cannot provide or accommodate 6-foot distancing on the buses. It's just not practical or feasible. And so we would have anywhere from 40 to 60 students on each bus at all different grade levels. And because of that, we would like to require face coverings on all of our transportation. That would, of course, include our drivers as well. Just want to remind you that because of some of our drivers that wear glasses and things like that, we would also include the face shields as well as face coverings as an option.
So the big change there is, right, like last Tuesday, we strongly recommended wearing face coverings for our kids on the buses, but now we're saying we'd like to strike that state, that they would be required on the buses. And again, it goes back to what we just talked about, if we're saying about maintaining the physical distancing, when they're not. So that's kind of where we're going there. We also look at, from a standpoint, we view transportation as it's, we're trying to view everything in being consistent throughout, but transportation itself, we also view it as an absolute kind of need and requirement for some people to have access to school, right? I mean, it's an absolute need for some people to have access to school. And if you're eligible for the transportation, we recognize for a lot of those people who are eligible, then they might, it might be their only way of getting to school, and to have that access to that free and appropriate public education. So then we're saying if it's viewed as not optional, but the buses are not optional for all families who are eligible for transportation, but required, like they have to have it, then what could we do to assist since it's not optional for them? Like they don't get to pick and choose. Now, somebody could say, well, their parents could take them. Yes, but they are eligible for transportation, and their parents, even though I think a lot of parents might elect to take kids, their parents may not be able to take them due to various reasons, and they're eligible for it. So that's not optional to me anymore. That's us having to do a requirement. And so how do we meet that? So that's a little bit of that. That's a little bit of why that thought. The other thing is another one. Athletics is on the second part tonight, so I've got Reed here. We'll update that later, and that's action item B tonight. So we'll take on the athletics later. Another change is we want to take you to the calendar, which you had approved of. I think in December or January, if I looked at our minutes, but you had approved of the calendar. And so we are recommending a change on the calendar, and that is our original school district calendar had August 24th and August 28th as no school days for staff. And we're recommending now that August 24th and August 28th, along with the other days already that week that were in-service days, so we're recommending that whole week be in-service days along with the 31st. But originally, we did not have the 24th or 28th, and we're saying we need them. Now, in place of it, we're going to take the place of November 30th and February 11th. So November 30th and February 11th, so those would become no school, no in-service days. So they become a no school / no in-service days on those days. It doesn't affect our support staff at all, contracts. This is just on the teaching side. But we felt we definitely need, with how much is going on and how much training is going to be needed in time, we need days. We need days. And so that's our best recommendation, and we would definitely like to have that get approved tonight, so our staff can know. Our staff's already aware we're bringing it forth tonight, but we'd like to get it approved tonight so they can make appropriate arrangements too when those dates weren't originally scheduled. And then the AB schedule, the hybrid model. If you recall, the hybrid model AB, we are still with our initial recommendation, and that's the 5 days a week. That's our still initial recommendation. We stay with our initial recommendation, but we do want to bring up a little bit of conversation we've had, and that is, I said last week, if capacity is an issue, that's where I think a discussion of that should occur. But we still are sticking with the 5 days and saying we want to see if we can make what we've stated work in regards to everything. But with that being said, we want to make you aware that we've had discussions that if a building, not a district, if a building is recognizing that they cannot accomplish what the original intent of our reentry plan was, and through varying solutions and problem solving, we're just still not able to do the intent of our reentry plan in that building. Like, we're just running into difficulties everywhere, physical distancing or this or that, right? and we're trying to resolve what we can't, then what we're saying is we would like you guys to consider giving us the okay, or we could always bring it back by all means, but it would be bringing it forth saying we're not jumping to virtual immediately unless we're told to. What we would do is we bring it back saying, here's the problems we're running into, here's everything we've been trying to do, not delaying it either. Like we need to decide, we need to resolve it or move on, right? We can't like work through weeks and go, couldn't make it happen. Well, during that time, what was occurring, Chris, right? We would need to make decisions quickly, but one of the decisions might be, we're recommending that building move to an AB model. If we can't make the other things work, instead of going to a virtual, which, you know, unless we are told to go to virtual, we would want to go to the AB model, because we do believe then, let's say probably the issues we could anticipate maybe we couldn't resolve, we know that reducing that capacity probably would allow us to resolve it. So we want that to be, we want people to know that we know that's not ideal for parents, all right, to start off full and then go to an AB model and be like, oh, that's convenient, now I've got to reschedule again. I think it's more convenient than just jumping all the way to a full virtual if we can make it happen. So that, but we wouldn't just do that for no reason. It would be the building level administration and the teams probably at the building levels are saying we're struggling to make the 5-day and all the requirements within our reentry plan happen. And they've been working through it diligently in an urgent fashion, can't make it happen. We would want that to be a consideration instead of jumping to a different level. So, and then finally, and it's just an FYI for all of you, and that is the FFA, which I did want to bring up because I don't know if I've got all that information somewhere. Stace, do you have that information by chance off the top of you?
Yeah.
I've got it in my paper somewhere, but they're all out of order here a little bit. Oh, I've got it. Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to let you know, this is from Mr. Holly. We had a discussion about this, and that is the East Troy Community School District. I'm writing you in regards to East Troy FFA members and participation at the Walworth County Fair Junior Shows. Due to the COVID-19 situation, the East Troy FFA members participating in the Walworth County Fair Junior Shows September 2nd through the 7th will be participating independently of the East Troy FFA chapter. The University of Wisconsin Extension removed all involvement, which includes all 4-H involvement at the Walworth County Fair. Therefore, the Fair Board removed the youth organization requirement for all participants, thus allowing all individuals to participate independently. Because there is no youth organization requirement for participation at the 2020 Walworth County Fair, the East Troy FFA chapter will not be involved this year, and all students will participate if they choose to independently outside of East Troy School District. This requirement will be only in place for the 2020 Walworth County Fair right now. All right, so that's it. The floor is you guys.
Thank you.
You bet, thank you.
I guess the first thing we just need to decide is to go with, as Chris mentioned, the 5-day week, the hybrid, or virtual. Let's get that decided. Talk about face masks maybe after that.
I
How that goes.
think face masks is kind of a key to that decision. I feel the best chance of going back 5 days a week and making it work is with the masks on. But I want to know, is there any new information on masks that you've gotten, Janet, like since last meeting?
Just that they're just pointing, there's been a lot of pointing to the study. I listened to a CDC stakeholder phone call, and they were just talking about how I apologize, I can't remember the state, there were 2 salon workers who did not know that they were infected, and they were wearing masks while they worked, and every one of their customers, I think there was 139, if I'm remembering correctly, there's 139 customers, and after various treatments, which were all greater than 15 minutes, no one else contracted COVID-19. And there were various other, they didn't go into what the other things were, but it was like cleaning protocols, and they limited the capacity for sitting, like how many people could sit in the salon at the same time. But really the masks was what they were pointing to, as they're saying, that's a pretty good indication right there that they're effective. So it was just people wearing their own. It wasn't like a specific kind. So it was a cloth face covering, not an N95 or anything, surgical mask, anything like that. So that was the most recent that I heard. That was yesterday at 2 o'clock. So that was just their big, that was their biggest action, or their biggest study that wasn't really a study.
Have you heard anything on this talk of that they're dangerous in any way or for extended periods of time for kids?
No, there's a study out there, and I can, if you guys would like to see that, I can try to find that. I apologize, I don't know where it is in my stack right now, but that actually says that there's no decrease in your ability to breathe. It's more uncomfortable than anything. They say it's more of a psychological, something on your face, you know what I mean? Like something you're not used to again. But there's not any, they haven't had any proven, or they point to the fact that there's nothing that's proven to be harmful. While there are some people that, due to various potential medical conditions or psychological or disabilities, things like that, that there may be like adverse effects based on more case by case, but not necessarily like a health harm per se. So yeah, as far as I know, I mean, everything that I've read, I've been looking at that quite a bit, and they're saying that they're pretty safe. And really, again, it's there's a lot of pointing to the fact that, again, you're doing it, as someone else mentioned, you're kind of doing it for other people. Like, you're not wearing the mask because you're afraid you're going to get sick. You're wearing the mask so you don't share something that you don't know you have. So.
So I'm curious on enforcement of how does this look in a typical school day where you're looking across all age levels from pre-K through 12th grade. Little kids come in, or they show up at the bus, they forget their mask, are they not allowed on? During the day, if they take it off for a while, what happens? I just want to see how this works.
We're going to have a supply available. We're getting masks from the DPI, and another organization are donating masks to every school district in Wisconsin. So we are getting a certain number of cloth face masks. They are all the same. And I want to say it's like 4,000?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. All right, so we're getting those donated to us. And so we were anticipating giving 2 per student, and then having 1 per staff, and then keeping some as like a stockpile. If a student were to show up at the bus, they would be offered a mask. And again, it's more an opportunity to educate, more so than a punishment or a punitive thing, I would imagine. Being the nurse, I mean, this is just another chance for us to give them some more information, potentially change their mind, but we wouldn't want to make anyone feel bad. This isn't a shaming thing. This isn't a bullying tactic, nothing like that. It would be, can you put this on? If there's not monitors on the bus, if there's not an additional person other than the driver, if there's not another adult, there's not really a way for the driver to enforce. Again, when they come on or when they come off, the driver can say, hey, put your mask on. But it's not going to be their responsibility because that's not safe. So unless there's a monitor on the bus to do something, we're hoping that people will be doing it themselves. I don't know if there's cameras on the bus or not, but if that's something and it's continually a same kid, then that probably would have to be brought to the building level, and then a parent discussion. I would imagine, just again, re-education, and as Dr. Hibner stated, that if they don't feel like that's something that they want to partake in, then they would be given other options.
Yeah, just to answer your question, Ted, I mean, we wouldn't turn away a student if they showed up without a mask. And I think it's important that the drivers aren't put in a position where they're having to deal with that discipline. And so they would report that to the building administration. And we're talking about if it's a repeated offense, so if some kid misses a day or something, not to make a big deal out of it, but if it's a repeating problem, then they would bring that to building's attention.
But you would plan on I mean, you would be giving them a mask
Yeah.
if they can, okay, yes.
Yeah,
It
we
wouldn't
would be
just be, you don't
offering-
have to do it today, it would be, we'd give you one, and then again, what they do with it once they're in their seat is beyond your control, but
We talked about the whole bus monitor idea. Although it's a good idea, we felt like to be consistent again across the school district, that we weren't going to put specialized additional staff on a school bus. Just like we're not adding additional staff other than maybe the isolation rooms to the buildings. And so it's going to be an interesting, I think, first couple of weeks of school as we roll this out and things like that. But I think, as Janet said, it's going to be an educational process and just trying to remind the students to be wearing the masks on the buses.
And we spend a good deal of time at the start of the school year teaching appropriate behaviors, so I see this just being an added layer onto that whole system. So it's a new behavior that we're teaching, and really helping kids understand the why behind it. That I think is oftentimes where you run into any kind of obstacles if kids don't understand why they're doing it, or adults. So I think really helping people understand why some of the things that we talked about earlier, and just trying to help each other out and all of this together. I will be teaching that and acknowledging it along the way.
So going back to your question, Tony, is there new studies showing maybe the ineffectiveness or health issues related to masks? So I don't think we should ignore that there are studies, but if we're looking at the recommendations from DHS and CDC and our local health departments, they are still a good layer of protection. The studies that I really would be concerned about is the reusable face masks when they're not being laundered correctly. There's more health effects, adverse health effects due to that, and that goes back to the education, especially in the beginning of school, trying to talk, and it actually starts tonight with the viewers here, the people here, the viewers there, is if we're going to do those sorts of things, we need to have good practices with laundering those face masks, and then also working with the families and talking to the students and making sure that that's happening, and then staff being cognizant, maybe identifying maybe students that are wearing filthy face masks or soiled face masks, so that we can work with them to maybe get them solid face masks. So that's just something that I've seen enough data on that being the potential hazard with the face masks. So I didn't want to ignore that.
Can I ask administration too? I just want to ask you guys if you speak up. I mean, that's what this is about. And that is, so originally it was strongly recommended, right? Masks, face coverings, I don't like the word masks, face coverings, because it does offer a different variety. And then it went to, we're going to face coverings if proper physical distancing can't go, and that's what we changed for recommendation tonight. What is that, what does it do if it goes to requirement of face coverings for you? Because I think, I don't want to get in your world. I mean, it's important to know what does that do different so they understand that. So what's the difference between if they were to say a required face covering tonight, or if they were to approve required face coverings when physical distancing can't be maintained? What does that do in your worlds?
One of the questions that I have is if we're going to move to that requirement of face masks, could there be zones in the building? So maybe right now, we're zoned by subject matter. So we have math down one wing, English down the other. Could we switch that potentially and have a wing that is not face masks, where people could choose to not wear face masks unless we could not provide the social distancing or physical distancing requirements? That aside, could it be for students, not for staff, that they would choose to wear face coverings in a classroom or not?
Well, go off what you said, Stace, because I want to go on everybody. Thank you. I mean, I think that's an important thing. Like, if masks were to be required, it does have to get defined still. So where are they not? Or else it's beginning to end of day, and maybe that's what you want. I'm not saying that, right? Maybe that's what you want. But because we can't have later, well, crying out loud, Chris, when they're outside, why don't you let them take it off? Hey, we didn't say that. We said they were required, right? We have to be that clear. Like, we need to be that clear. That's why the recommendation came from us of face coverings when distancing can't be maintained. Because what that means when a kid is possibly out, let's say a teacher elects to take a classroom outside and they're maintaining distancing and they're outside, we're saying, look, we're not our recommendation is not required at that point in time. Now, if we required it, they would be required out there. Again, good, bad, or indifferent. I'm just saying, those things have to be clearly understood so we know how to implement the correct procedures from tonight. Go ahead, you guys.
I mean, the thing that I would add too, I mean, and this has been a topic of conversation for obviously quite a while here too, is like, we also are considering the request of like maybe those zones or areas because there aren't other mitigating options that we might have. Like, I'll give you an example in keyboarding over at Prairie View. We believe that's a critical skill that kids need to start to be able to pick up in 3rd grade. But in that keyboarding lab, we cannot physically, we've run the square footage, we cannot get 25 students in there with 6 feet of space. So we've found, where we landed is, okay, this would be the area that because of, we cannot do the physical distancing, is appropriate for a student to be wearing a mask for that half hour, 45 minutes. And or there's also maybe some barriers that are put up in place. I mean, I think Lindsay and I have talked quite a bit too, like that younger child, that's where it gets difficult too, that 6, 7, 8-year-olds and they're in their face and they're, how much can they continue to wear a mask from start to finish with being reasonable? Like we've talked about needing frequent breaks for that classroom, for those students. So if you're in a math class, you've been working and maybe you do have a mask, or if you're up front close with the teacher in a small guided study, guided reading area, then maybe that's another area where a mask would be required. So there's lots of different things that go into this beyond just mask or no mask. Like we've tried to find other areas or other ways to mitigate the exposures.
And I think, Chris, the short answer to your question about when might they not have to wear them, in elementary classrooms, we've spent a lot of time kind of mapping out how to space them out. And so when kids are sitting in their spot, we feel like we space them out, or we'll provide some barriers on tables to allow for them to be invited to take them off. Certainly, if someone wanted to leave them on, they could. When they're going to move around the room or gather in a small group and be closer together, then that would be a time that they come back on. So I think in my mind, I think about zones in the building, like Mark described, in the keyboarding lab or in the art room where they might have to wear them, and then circumstances within the classroom where they may have to wear them, and then when they're at their seats, that's a time when they could get some relief from it.
And that makes sense to me. I guess has there been discussion about different age groups having different requirements or options to them? I know you talked a little bit some there, but I talked about studies. I know there's studies out there from South Korea, Europe, saying younger kids are better probably without the mask, where older kids are more susceptible to passing it on.
Yeah, it's a good question and a valid conversation. We've really talked kind of more consistently about the organization as a whole and our student population as a whole, so we haven't gotten into a lot of detail about some groups wearing them and some groups not. We certainly could have that conversation more. I don't know, Janet, if you have specific thoughts about that, but
So the New York Times article was a South Korea article you might be referring to, and I think they were identifying students 10 and under, that there wasn't a whole lot of evidence showing that they were transmitting the COVID virus between themselves and even the older age groups. And I think that's the one purpose of it. I just want to take it back a little bit and say, if we prioritize our mitigation measures, the number one is the hand hygiene, and I think Janet talked about that maybe a little bit more at that last week, hand hygiene. The next one is the physical distancing. And then we have all the other mitigating measures, and I think we would end all those other ones. The face coverings is maybe number one of all those other ones. But what other ones can we do? Like Mark had talked about, the barriers. We're going to be talking about microbial coatings. But the real goal is to continue to offer the educational pieces like keyboarding and STEAM and STEM. We can't possibly maintain the physical distance in those spaces. So what other mitigation measures are we going to do? face coverings is number one in those spaces. Number two is microbial coatings, proper disinfection, sanitization, barriers, that sort of thing. So we already started developing space, or developing a list of spaces, which some of that's in the plans, of what we might be able to call a face mask covering zone.
Just wonder, I know a lot of people are seeing barriers at, things between registers and stores and stuff. If you were to right now put a plastic barrier between me and Tony, yeah, I'm not gonna be able to blow in his general direction. But if I sneeze, regardless of whether I have my mask on or not, I've seen people pull their mask off to sneeze and then spew out their germs everywhere. That barrier isn't gonna do anybody any good. So I just kinda wanna point that out. I also am curious from the administration standpoint, what we plan to do for our deaf and or hard of hearing students and or staff who rely on reading lips to, communicate and understand what's going on in class. If our teachers are masked up and trying to teach a class and have hard of hearing students in the classroom who are used to reading lips and trying to pick up what the teacher is saying because they can't fully hear, and now our teacher has a mask on, you just prohibited that child from learning. What are we doing with that?
So there are some clear mask options that have windows. So we're looking at a variety of options like that, and still gathering guidance from kind of national organizations and other professionals that work directly, so audiologists and how FMs pick up speech and things like that. So yes, that is definitely something that we are continuing to look at and make sure that we have things in place so that people are able to still access that education.
And I also think that a big part of that is communication. So we don't necessarily know everyone who is hard of hearing or everyone who reads lips, because not everyone necessarily either has a diagnosis or shares that diagnosis. So there's a lot of people that have things that we may not know about, or that may not necessarily have a diagnosis of it, but this is just a way that they found to do it for themselves. So that would be a key point of communication with that, which is I think a big part of these, Ready, Set, Go conferences, is that you're talking directly to that parent, and the parent may not even know for some students. Sometimes this is going to come up in class when a kid's having a hard time, and normally they're a good student, and now they seem to be really struggling. Well, so is it because we've been off for so many months? Is it because things look different? Is it like a psychological thing where maybe they need a different need met first? Or is it because of something like that? So I think that would then be a key piece, and that's going to be part of this flexibility and this, just this constant communication, keeping this communication open and clear and frequent, that people then can tell us, like, my kid seems to be having trouble. And then we delve down, okay, it's not this, not this, not this, what could it be? And, so those things may not always be evident right away either. So I just think it's important that we all recognize that it's everyone's responsibility to communicate back and forth, ours as well as parents, students, speaking up for themselves, encouraging them to say if there's a problem, hey, be an advocate for yourself. This is a really great time to do those kinds of things.
Just 3 weeks ago, if you look at our original proposal 3 weeks ago, it didn't have, for staff, it was not face coverings, it was the face shield, due to that reason. But over the course of time, right, we have gotten further information that indicated we needed to go face coverings rather than face shields due to the fact of which one was more prevalent and better to possibly be requiring of the staff. But that was the whole idea why this group had recommended the shields at one time, was exactly what you were stating. And we thought at least the child could see the lips, see the mouth, all of that. So it is something we're just going to have to be cognizant of, communicate, and work through. There's no doubt. I even worry about that on a different level of the live stream. And just, you've got the face covering on now. So Justin knows that we've said that, like, we need to work on this and pilot this and make sure, can you actually even hear all of this, that as we suspect we can, but we're going to even, and the child who reads lips, yeah, we're going to, like Kate said, it's going to have to be a lot of individual conferences.
So if you go back to Jessica, there's studies all over the place with some of this. So, again, and then then like even like when Chris is talking about face shields, like there's a study right here on the face shields now showing that there is supportive data saying that it's effective. So I think what they show, it's just like who you believe, but I think if we focus on the sources that we really should be, the CDC, DHS, and DPIS, and our local health departments, that's really where we're trying to stick to. But I think I just wanted to point out that I think some of the good news is the addition to the HVAC system. So the bigger particles from a sneeze or a cough, generally gravity's taking those right down in front of the person. We have somewhat of a solution for some of those, like desks, how do we disinfect those? But yeah, there's no doubt that stuff is going to get airborne, and adding these pieces to our HVAC equipment is going to continuously clean that air. Will there be, I would never say there's not going to be transmission because the stuff's just not preventable. But again, if we just add these little layers of mitigation measures, we're just going to provide a little bit healthier environment, not even a little, we're going to provide a healthier environment to help control some of it and mitigate it. So,
yeah, and I think that's the key, is that it's going to come down to everybody from K4 to staff understanding what mask protocol is. If they're messing with their mask and they're sneezing, they're lifting their mask when they sneeze. I mean, that's where we've got to stop that behavior at the mask and not at the, and then just let the secondary measures fall into place, whether it's the HVAC system, whether it's the barriers. I mean, we said it from day one. We know we can't stop everything. The goal is to minimize as much as we can within a common sense approach.
Can I share something? It might help principals with that explanation, like Lindsay was talking about, is explaining to the kids why, the whys of why we would do that. And, I'm thinking back to this parent survey when I took it. I don't even remember what I answered on the mask back then, but I'm sure it was a lot different than now. And one thing I heard that made a big difference to me, and I'm not telling anybody what to believe, but it kind of, in the overall grand scheme of things right now, really makes sense. And that was, I don't even remember who said it. It said being responsible with masks, you got to think of it as a gateway back to normalcy, as opposed to thinking of it as an obstacle. And when I started looking at it that way a few weeks ago, I started seeing it in a whole different way. So, that's why, that might be a good way to help explain, maybe this will be a quicker way back to the way you remember it being in the past. So that's how I look at it.
What is that? I mean, the whole mask thing to me, don't get me started on it. I think we have responsible adults in the building, that masks should be encouraged, but not required. And the empathy part of it, we talk about empathy, but you're going to force kids to wear a mask in situations that they may not be comfortable wearing masks. You're going to create a whole different set of problems here. Staff that now has to be an enforcement officer. Part of their job, they have a hard enough job as it is, and now we're going to put that on them. And they haven't even talked about masks. I've heard the phrase mask shaming, right? We have to, if we're going to require masks at any time in the building, you have to put specific requirements on every single mask. I see in this room 5, 6 different types of masks, right? We're going to make everybody wear the exact same mask, so you don't have a Packer mask and some political slogan mask. It's a whole other set of problems that we're introducing into the district that we have not talked about at all. I have no problem with somebody wanting to wear a mask and wearing a mask. I have a problem requiring the people in the district to wear a mask.
I'm in agreement with you there. We do invite an atmosphere and opportunities for bullying based on the type of mask. If it's homemade, if it's a surgical mask, if it's half fallen off your face, your string broke, you're wearing it under here, under your nose, under your chin. It's all down here and none of it's covering here. I'm in full support for people who wish to wear a mask. I have worn one
labels on them or whatever, I mean, that's as simple as same as what t-shirts are allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're gonna have a green mask versus a black mask versus a regular white cheap 99-cent mask.
Part of that though is that we are, as a district, we are providing 2 masks per student. So that, you can't force them to wear the masks we give them, but they are an option. And I would venture to guess that there's going to be a lot of families that have their own already, because there are a lot of people who choose to wear. There's a lot of people who choose not to. But I think that the fact that we are providing, it's not something that they don't have access to. Everyone will have equal access to those 2 masks each person does get to. So in that sense, I mean, I definitely can understand, and I know that I wouldn't want to be a kid again. I got picked on a fair amount, and I'm all right with being an adult. Still get picked on, but it's fine. But I think that that's not to say something about that, but that's another opportunity for us to educate. I mean, we do promote, or not promote bullying. You know, there's an anti-bullying, there's a lot of education, there's a lot of this PBIS with positive behavior, respect, responsibility, all those kinds of things. And I think that what we're doing, or what we should be doing, and what I think all the staff already does a great job of, is really promoting those things and encouraging differences. They're fine, and educating people about things that they can, and then working to the best of their ability to explain things and educate about them. And then people are still unfortunately going to do what they're going to do, but I think that a lot of stuff can be minimized right there.
If we're going to make a justification, kids wearing different masks is a reason not to have masks, then we need to immediately implement a rule that says we're going to have every kid show up in a uniform, and each uniform is going to be exactly alike.
That's not a health issue. We're talking about a potential health issue. I can show you 20 studies, and no disrespect to the medical staff. You can show me 20 studies that say mask is a godsend for this, and I can show you 20 studies that show they're not. Right? And why release, if masks are so great, we release all these prisoners from jail, right, because of COVID. Why don't we just give them a mask and they'll be protected, right? If that's what solves this issue, why didn't we do that?
Well, but the argument was, if we ask them to wear masks, it's going to separate them more, and I just don't think that holds water. Tony hit it on the head. Kids wear different clothes. I mean, at the very least, let's agree that if we're going to require every kid to look alike from the neck up, then we should probably have.
I'm not saying we require them to look like. I'm telling you, we have opened up a whole other set of problems with the mask issue if they're required at any point. Well, that's not just, teachers are going to want to wear different type of masks compared to different teachers. Is that all okay? We need a policy now, a mask policy. Like we have a clothing policy. You can't show your belly button. We're going to have a mask policy. What's acceptable, what is not acceptable.
Because people can come up with masks that are completely see-through, completely just mesh, which would probably do absolutely nothing. Could have 3/4 of the kids wearing them, and what are we going to do about it? Nothing. So, to me,
I think that the other thing to think about though is that, so our goal is to try to get things back to quote unquote normal. And I think that the phased, scaling back on measures as things progress and the situations improve, and we can prove, you've done this, just like with your kid. You don't, give them the keys and, all right, you're 16, go ahead. Like, they have to prove things, right? They have to be able to prove that it's safe and that they're going to do things and they're going to follow the rules, and then you can back off as the numbers start to go down, or as we're safely able to do this, or we see that in this classroom, we can actually distance a lot better than we thought we could, or we can't. But you're just going to have, this is part of that flexibility, and I think we want people to come back into schools. Parents want it, the economy wants it, teachers want it. Everyone wants to be back to normal, but they also want to avoid the risk that comes with it. And so I think that this is one of those areas that, in my opinion, and again, this is just my opinion, but I think that anything we can do to prevent having to close within 4 days, we don't want to be the first district to close because our plan wasn't up to par. So I just want to put that out there. I do have the health department right now reviewing it. I was told that they're supposed to get back to me by the end of the week. I gave it to them last week, but they've, as you can probably well understand, they're inundated with things right now. But that's definitely a decision you guys have to make. I don't envy it at all, but I would like to put my information strongly that I think it really is going to be more beneficial than harmful, in my
Well,
opinion.
that's what I said when you first started the questioning. That's why I wanted to go right to masks, because I feel that the only chance we have 5 days, all the kids back in this school, all of them, is to wear the mask. And even the hybrid is questionable without masks. Being distanced enough to be safe. I think, and 5 days back in school is the most normal of the plans. And if that's what we want to get as close to normal as we can, and all it takes is to wear masks to get to that point, I don't see a way around it.
And I totally agree. I think the 5-day week is the way to go at this point in time. To me, at least at this point in time, making masks mandatory just seems to be going a little bit beyond what I'm comfortable with at this point in time. I think it's going to be an enforcement nightmare for just about all the kids, especially at the younger grades, pre-K, kindergarten, first grade. I see it as virtually. I'd hate to be a teacher in that room trying to make that happen, because I don't know how they do it. Yes, education's a good thing, encouraging the use of the mask, trying to do everything we can to have them do it, but to make it an absolute requirement, I think is going to be very difficult.
I think everybody's return, like we all want to return to normal. And like you said, normal is going back to school 5 days a week. But we're not going to return to where we were. We're not going to go back from the shell that we broke out of. We're growing as a society. Whether we like it or not, this is what's happening. We have something out there that is, lethal, but also so is cancer, and so is heart disease, and so is the flu for certain people. People used to go out of their way for their loved ones because their sibling or spouse or brother, cousin, sister, whatever, best friend has the flu and they're sick. And what do? Because they love them. They take them some soup. They, show them some act of kindness. And a lot of these things were kind of stripped from us with this mandatory quarantine. Being able to do these things, like we're not going to be able to return to what we once were.
No, but
It's just
as
an
close as possible is what we're striving for here.
I understand that. I don't think that mandating masks are going to be the way to go.
The CDC is very clear, and I go back to what Andy said. If you look at the State Department of Health, if you look at the CDC, the two things that they say, physical distancing and some form of mask. If we really need to create a policy, I guess I'd like to believe that if we go forward with something, people will be smart enough to understand that if we have, whether it's young kids, whether it's older kids, if they're not playing by the rules, we'll have to create stricter policies. If they don't play by the rules, we may be back to 100% virtual education. I would love to believe that people are going to, on their own, agree to do this. But I hate to do this. I take a look at even graduation this weekend. The number of people, it was highly recommended at graduation that face coverings be included. I think I counted 6 seniors and about as many people in the crowd. Now, it was outdoors, and it was physically distanced, so that's a little bit different. But again, how much weight did strong recommendation carry?
Gives freedom of choice.
It does, and
Freedom of choice. And all those seniors, if they wanted, they were outside, they were physically distanced, and you still want them to wear a mask. It makes no sense.
You're missing my point, though. My point is, it was requested, it was strongly recommended. They chose not to. So again, what weight do we think it's going to carry from strongly recommend? Again, I'm with Tony. A 5-day model, as much as I want to see it happen, doesn't work because we can't physically distance. We just can't. Not the way we need to. If we add the masks, it may give us a fighting shot.
I will counter your mask point here.
Please do.
If you have, we make this a mandate, we will lose funding because I guarantee you there will be families who will be pulling their students out of our district because they refuse to put their students in a school where masks are mandatory.
But I've heard the exact same.
I've heard it
So many
multiple
people-
times.
I've heard it on both sides. Yep, I've
I've
heard
heard
it
a
on both
couple on
sides.
the, you better have mask requirements, but a far overwhelming number are, my kids are not going to school if you require masks.
They will. No, this-
Why are we
this-
offering different options? Why are we offering?
The schools are all going that way, even the ones that already put out their plans, they left it open because they knew things are changing, and so many have already, Franklin just put theirs out today, they're having mandatory
Wauwatosa
masks, like
says no
Geneva,
masks.
mandatory masks.
You can find as many that say masks.
Right, but they're
as
leaving it
don't.
open, and my guess is that within a week or two before school starts, they're gonna also go that way.
And I think everything is still, everything in this plan is still gonna be open until the day we open up, and even well after that, things are gonna change based on the circumstances on the ground. I think we all have to recognize that.
They could change the other way too, if we go mandatory masks and things start looking better, we can always lift it at some point too, couldn't we?
Just so everybody's aware, I think everyone is, I just want to make sure, this is great dialogue, even though you might be like, no, it's not. Yeah, it really is, because this is what has to happen. So if people are unfamiliar, to be honest, right, on difficult conversations, this is great. Because this is what has to happen. It's not the silence or anything else. So I know it makes people feel uncomfortable sometimes to listen, but, but truly, being a part of this type of conversation all the time, I just sit back, I'm like, this is exactly how we have to talk it through. The only thing I just want to make sure everyone understands, you might be like, yeah, we got it, Chris, was the change in recommendation for us was not a requirement of masks from beginning to end of day, right? We were trying to balance, just so everyone understands, and throw it out if you want and all that. We were trying to balance what we thought we were hearing from, obviously, CDC and else, but also from the staff survey about, and then where we felt was the balance from the family survey. And the family survey was not overwhelmingly concerned about the mask, overwhelmingly, but there still was concerns a little bit there. But we were trying to balance all those components. And where we were going with it is, okay, so what's maybe striking a balance? That people, in our minds, we were like, people really want the 5-day. That's what we felt we were hearing and seeing. And we do too. So we're like, what strikes that balance to hopefully ensure the 5-day can start, the 5-day can continue, and we can keep going and then adjust as needed. And so then that's where we went with, okay, so what about how face coverings assist there or not assist? And then we went with, we don't want to require, but we want to state, because what I was hearing from building level administration is, off of the mitigation measures and with Andy's assistance was, we can get physical distancing in areas, but there's areas that we're a little concerned about, and we just don't know. And to be frank, it's because of the unknowns too. We don't know how many kids are necessarily at this point in time coming back, right? They might choose, let's say if we chose this option, we have to 25% say, thank you, appreciate it, really appreciate that you provide us choices, and we want virtual right now. Absolutely. Absolutely. Totally understand why maybe. I do, but I'm saying you have your own choices. That's why we're providing options. So if 25% of our student population, which is the next thing we have to figure out, elects to choose virtual, that changes the whole thing in regards to even the questionable areas that we have might have physical distancing. But we're saying until we know that, under this recommendation, we're saying, not knowing that, we want to say there could be areas that are identified as zones that we can't honor the physical distancing, and so that would be the areas in which we require masks. So we're not saying requiring masks from beginning to end. We're trying to strike that balance, because what we were saying is physical distancing is essential. That's what we want. And when we can't, then that could change based upon if 25% of our student populace at one building, even more or less the district, don't come. They go virtual, which we're offering. Well, that changes things, maybe. So that I wanted to make sure everyone understood that, because I kind of was hearing it, and maybe that's where you want to take it, but it was kind of getting, in essence, like people were getting on a topic of yes or no. And we did not recommend a yes or a no. We recommended kind of a striking of a balance, with the physical distancing being the key component. And again, I think principals would be honest and tell you that's got to be worked out. A big part of that being worked out, I heard Mark say it the other day. Chris, I can't give you an answer on that yet because I don't know how many kids are going to be in this grade level yet. I'm like, okay, that makes sense to me. That totally makes sense. I get it. Why you can't give me the answer yet that I wanted.
What is our definition of physically distancing? 6 feet?
6 feet is what we're trying to go with, correct, Andy?
So when we went around to every single classroom, we tried to maintain, we basically went through the work of setting up the current furniture that's in those classrooms to 6 feet. We provided a list to every single building administrator based on, again, square footage, the makeup of the room as far as whether it's rectangular, square, whatever, the current furniture, built-in cabinetry, where the smart board's set up. We took all that into account, and the 6 foot. But now we rolled that out to the principals, and now they're actually digging into that and trying to make heads or tails of what does that really look like. Can we grab, based on this type of furniture, we're struggling a little bit, so what other furniture can we take maybe out of the hallway that's going to accommodate that? But also keeping in mind, I'll be honest here, keeping in mind that a student that is at an elementary level, so let me just step back. 6 feet is what we did. 6 foot nose to nose on cement, right? Because there's no definition of where that 6 foot starts and ends, right? So we did 6 foot nose to nose, basically. But we also feel like if we could spread out in a room, but we might be trying to jam a kid over there in a cubby to make that work. That's not reasonable. I wouldn't want to be a parent of that student that's kind of isolated in a different area. So we're still in the process of really trying to dig into those student numbers and looking at the furniture that we can move around in the buildings. But then we start getting bits and pieces, again, looking outside CDC and looking outside DHS and looking at independent studies. You're hearing from the American Academy of Pediatrics, who's throwing out a 3 foot number, but then they were still talking about face masks. So it's like, what can we accomplish if we maybe close it in to maybe 5 feet? Well, now we might be able to fit 2 more kids in those classrooms.
And beyond that, let's be real, right? Physical distancing, we're trying with the 6 feet, but I'm not going to deny it. We've had those discussions based upon it all, again, how many kids are in that room, right? If the full capacity of the desired classroom or what we would have had before this pandemic came back, I'm sure the principals would look at you and say, in this class, it works. In this class, it's probably 4.5, 5.5 feet. It's not going to be 6, Chris, if you go in there identically. And then and that's where we set physical distance. We're doing our best to provide physical distance. But there is no doubt if you're going to take it by 6 feet and 6 feet and it's going to be measured off and all those things, then the reality is too, okay, you're going to have some classrooms, and we've talked about this, let's just state it. Some classrooms are like, really? We're going to walk into one 3rd grade classroom that's got all masks, and another 3rd grade classroom is not requiring masks because they've got their 6+ feet. And so we're going to do our best on the physical distancing, but I said, I can tell you what parents will be doing. Parents will be picking and choosing then off that. They will have a nightmare of being able to configure that. I don't know how they would. So we went in with physical distancing, trying to do the 6 feet, but so much is dependent. As we all know, right? It's dependent upon what's the class size, and we don't know that now based upon these options. We won't know it until we get past the stage of approval.
And to be honest with you, I've been in both of the smaller kids' schools. They have generous the generous size classrooms. But I've seen it when all the kids are in there. I can't imagine unless you take all the furniture and bookshelves and everything out of there, maybe.
So specifically so there's areas that we might have given to Mark or Lindsay saying, right now with your furniture, 6 foot distancing, you can fit 23 kids in there. Well, we might need 25. Okay, so then we're going back. What's the mitigating measures? Face masks, barriers, what can we do there? Furniture. Lindsay's got a lot of round tables and some awesomely shaped tables, right? she doesn't have the furniture there, and we have to be good stewards with our funds. We can't, we could probably do 25 kids in every classroom by replacing all our furniture. Is that practical? I don't think it is. So it's like, so what other economical things can we do? So with the round tables, which, by the way, a round table at Lindsay's building, or so at Little Prairie, one person per table is all you can fit at those tables. So now we're back to the barriers and trying to engineer and manufacture with building materials that are available, because there's not many available to do some barriers. It's like, I think we can manufacture barriers where we can fit 4 at those tables. Contradictory to some of the studies with barriers, because I've read that, and, you know, but we're trying to find ways to make those work, because we just want the kids back in the schools, because we think for most kids, they need that in-person instruction. But it's just looking, and
wearing a mask cheaper though, and figuring out all that.
well, and I want to just go back to the bipolar ionization system. You know, we're providing some of the better air in the indoor air quality that we can now with that system, and I can tell you that there's just Muskego starting to add it. I've been getting phone calls because people are finding out that we're doing it. That's going to start taking off. So we're providing good indoor air quality with that system. So it's like, but when you start trying to pull back that physical distancing, and I'm not personally there yet, but we have to be reasonable. Every classroom is a case-by-case situation.
And that is a big reason why we're happy that you guys elected to invest in that bipolar ionization. I mean, it was what, $197,000. I'll state for the record. 192, thank you. And you want to say that 5,000. And I do appreciate that. I like it always going that direction. So, but I think that was a really wise investment. We were discussing that prior to any of this occurring. It just happened to be when March came, we're like, we know what we need to do on the HVAC now. Even if we didn't have really all the dollars to do it, we're like, this is an investment not because of just the pandemic. It'll assist us, right? But it's as we said, it's always going to assist in our airflow and air quality. And part of that was, we said, look, we know we need to improve on those things because there's going to be other challenges and barriers that won't always be perfect for us to address. I mean, to be frank, that this is why these are not easy. This is why we also are committed in the district to saying we absolutely want to provide options. It's not an option to like shift it. I don't want people thinking, oh, there he goes shifting it to virtual. Like, I don't want my child virtual. I respect that. I'm just saying that's what our goal is to provide parents understanding what that let's say in person, because I don't like face-to-face instruction, not the thing to say right now. In-person instruction will look like, what will happen for measures. Then I said it last week, that people do have to make choices. I know you're debating what those still mitigation measures are, but then there will be a choice, right? If uncomfortable at the beginning, then maybe you'll choose virtual to begin with at the beginning. And we've had this discussion amongst us. I mean, it'll help us to know where people are choosing, but we also know we're going to need to be flexible with that. People may want to, not feel as comfortable and move out. People may be more comfortable and move back in. And we're going to need to be flexible to that. And to be honest, that's where education should have been for a long time.
Chris, on a family survey, 64% of families said wearing a mask, students wearing a mask is not important, right? So if some families, obviously 64% of them don't feel a mask is necessary for their child. If those other ones that very important was 109 responses, if those people, for that reason or another reason, decided that they're not sending their kids to school and they went to virtual, right? After the first trimester, right, things have all of a sudden disappeared, right? Right after the election, everything's gone. They can come back in, right?
Yeah, it's
After
fluid.
a trimester or a week or a month.
We want to know, right, obviously we want to do a survey and figure out where people are somewhat believing they would go so we can start to plan accordingly. And so we want to share, right? And we want to share this type of information so people can make a true decision based upon what they know it will look like, feel like, right? Virtual or in person. But yes, it's going to be fluid. People will be able to come.
Can they transfer in any time? Can they change from virtual to...
Well, I'm speaking off the hip now, and my administration team, I'm not even looking out there because they might not be in agreement with me here. So that's something we truly need to discuss. But we know we need to be flexible to parents and to their situations, right? Because we know it could change anyways based upon a lot of things. I mean, our intent here is to go, what can we provide that we weren't even doing before all of this ever happened? And to be honest, when a child was even ill in the past, they weren't able to be streamlining into their classroom. I'm not saying they're going to feel like it, but now they would have that opportunity, right? We want to provide things that we weren't able to provide before. And so, that being said, we know that people are going to have different times, be moving in and out for different reasons, right? And we're going to accommodate to that within reason, right? I mean, because there's still management to everything. But yeah, that's where we think the live streaming, sorry, I keep saying streamline, streaming will assist us greatly.
Well, to get things moving, I would like to make a motion to go to the 5-day-a-week in-school instruction based on the recommendation from the administration that was presented to us previously before the modifications tonight.
So the original presentation, no
Yes.
modifications?
Wait, the original with no modifications?
Right. Basically, the only change was the requirement of face mask. I'm just not comfortable with that at this point in time, but that could change as we get closer to school.
It was without the proper spacing, not required.
Requirement when physical
In the
distance
new-
can be.
Right.
That's what
It was highly recommended, but not requirement at any point. And I think we just need to revisit it as we get, 2 weeks of school are probably.
Ted, can I clarify on the original one? It was strongly recommended for kids still, but the staff was required still. And I've heard different discussion on that tonight too, so, but you're saying you're making motion 5-day-a-week with the original language. And I just want to make sure everyone understands the original language had a requirement of staff. Okay. And so, and then off your motion, you'd be saying for the transportation, going back to strongly recommending face coverings, right?
Just close the question. Reed, are you okay with having students run their mile with their mask on in the gym when they have to do it in the middle of winter?
Are you referring to FIAD classes or to?
Yeah. When you're, is that, are students going to have to, in their FIAD classes, maintain their masks on?
If we were to require it, it would. And as you've all said, you can read one study that says it's fine, and you can read another study that says it's going to lower the oxygen intake. I can tell you, I have seen marathon runners with masks on. Marathon runners spend a lot of money to have air-restricting masks, but that's a professional runner that is doing that because they can't train in Colorado or something like that. For a student in a FIAD class, I think that FIAD teachers, putting my old FIAD hat on, that would be a difficult thing to create a lesson around, but it's certainly doable. But you could also gain physical distancing. If any room in the building can accommodate distancing, I would think our gyms generally could probably do. Correct. So the new proposal would be that if they can physically distance, still those masks wouldn't be required. So.
I guess before we
Just-
go further, do you have a second on that motion or?
I'll say.
Now discussion.
Just for Jessica, the DPI had said when they're physically exerting that they don't recommend masks when there's physical exertion such as like gym class. That is a little bit different than the WIAA guidelines. So again, I'm just saying that one of the things with DPI was that they don't necessarily have to. So that I don't, that would be probably a area that would be a little bit different than just the distancing, just for, because there are so many different things I think that would have to be looked at a little bit further.
And just so people are kind of aware, I won't go through, I don't want to put these districts out on because people are, it's so fluid. But I kind of had done some research on surrounding districts and other districts and conferences and all that. And so I'm going to say this but going through the list, there's a district as of right now, there's a district that's requiring masks. There's another district that says has not been determined, strongly considering thoughts about it. Another district saying highly recommended for students, required for all staff. Another district highly recommended for students, required for staff. Suggested to staff and students, but we'll be still discussing. And I think that we would agree that we're always going to be discussing. Optional for all, required based upon the county at this time. Not sure at this time, following county, still in discussion. Secondary students will wear masks. Elementary are going to be encouraged when they can't keep physical distancing. Following county, strongly encouraged for both students and staff. Strongly recommended for students. Staff will be wearing masks. Following county, sorry, no, that's it. It's almost said the district's name, sorry. Masks required for both when distancing can't be maintained. Masks will be required for both. Strongly recommended for students. Staff will be wearing masks when they cannot maintain distancing with other fellow staff members and our students. So I bring that up because I go, it shows it's kind of all over and it's fluid. It's all over and it's fluid.
I would just like, since we are strongly recommending, I would make a recommendations to parents if you feel that your child, your children, your family, you are, as a family, are requiring your students, your children to wear a mask. Have that discussion with your students. Have that discussion with your children and make it clear with their teachers that you want them to wear a mask. You feel that it is for their best interest, their safety, whatever. I strongly encourage that communication.
Yeah, but that's not what the masks are for.
I understand. But students, if parents feel that their child needs to come to school in a mask, they need to tell the child, you need to wear a mask.
Sure.
They cannot rely on the school to put that mandate in place and say, the school says you have to do it, so you have to do it. If you as a family make that decision together to wear masks in public, then you need to have that conversation with your children and take personal responsibility for that.
I guess that kind of goes back to what we're then all about here in the district, empowerment. Empowerment involves a certain level of risk, which is the nature of it.
I guess I'm struggling with why we're going against what our administrative teams. Our administrative teams a week ago had taken the time to research. They came to us with a set of recommendations. They have clearly come to the conclusion that there are situations where mandating a mask makes sense. I have yet to hear anything that would lead me not to follow the recommendations of our staff. I mean, you look at this plan. This is not a haphazardly assembled plan.
I don't think it was a week ago either.
No, I don't think it was either. But given that it's a fluid document, I could almost get behind the idea of a 5-day-a-week plan. But I guess I don't understand why we would not seek to maximize our protection in those situations that are highest risk. It just doesn't make sense.
Because obviously 64% of the families said they don't want it.
How long ago was that done, Steve?
I can only go up on the data I'm given, not on what you might have said or might not have said, or someone else might have said, it might be higher now. Right, we're a couple of weeks past.
Because to me, the biggest reason I have is the whole enforcement issue of it. I just don't see it as a viable option. I just see it as a mess.
We enforce things all the time.
Not like this. This is something totally different.
But also, they're the ones that are going to be figuring out the enforcement, and they're recommending it.
Yeah.
So they feel there's a way that it can be done.
I'm willing to trust our staff to decide, and it could be classroom by classroom. How the second grade classrooms deal with it is going to be different than how the high school has to deal with it. Again, we've got really good people all throughout the district. They've come to us with a recommendation, and we're sitting up here saying, we think we know better than you do. And my personal feelings aside, I struggle with telling them how to manage their classrooms and how to manage their students?
I don't think that is our role. Our role is to bridge the difference between, not the difference, but the community to the district or to the buildings. And I think that's kind of where I'm looking at it from, is what I'm hearing in the community.
Chris, can you help me understand something? Under the first of this face coverings on page 15,
Yep.
you say for the staff, it is recommended the school staff be required to wear face coverings when students or other staff are present. Can you define present for me? Is that in the building? If they're in the classroom by themselves, they still have to wear a mask? If there's a kid down the hall, is that present?
Yeah, we were saying it's the same. So if they're obviously in their classroom or prep hour and they're the only one in there, no, they can take it off. I mean, put it down, let it, have some fresh air, and then obviously if somebody were to come in their room, I would even say, again, we probably would have to clarify that. We've talked about that. If somebody came in the doorway, but I'm over at the other end, I have more than 6 feet. I've got
That's why I'm bringing
right.
it up. I mean,
So it would still not be. But what we're saying is, look, in the classroom, and again, we're kind of going with, and when that distance is, not being followed, we're asking for people to have a mask on. Somebody were to, for a staff member, somebody's to go out in the hallway, and they're like, well, it's not a passing period. Everyone's in their room, right? It's my prep hour. I go in the hallway. We're still asking. We would be asking as a staff, put your mask on. Put your face covering. Sorry, I like face covering. Put your face covering on. Why? We don't know where the interaction could come. Maybe you're out in the hallway and all of a sudden the passing period happens at that moment in time. So that's what we'd be asking for the staff.
I go back to that risk reward, and I feel like you don't have much to lose by wearing a mask. Other than someday you look back and say, remember when we wore masks and we didn't really need to? Boy, were we dumb. Right? I mean, there's nothing to lose there. But what could happen if we don't wear them is the risk. That is just the way I see it.
You could look at it from a standpoint, I know it's not necessarily going to help parents drastically when they're trying to make decisions about in-person or virtual. They would know that the board has elected to go 5 days, right? They would know some of the things, and what they could know is if the board were to approve the motion that's up on the docket right now, and that is the original verbiage that was presented last week, they would at least know of the conversation that's been had tonight, and that at this time, this is the verbiage that's still being implemented, but it's a fluid situation that could result in the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, right? If things change or whatever, that it could result in, it's no longer strongly recommend. It could shift to a requirement within areas that physical distancing can be.
And the wording is right in this original plan on page 15. There's a little asterisk that says additional protocols for student mask wearing will be developed closer to the start of school with additional guidance from health professionals. So there is already that verbiage that we could go back and retouch this place.
If this is the kind of sticking point, you could get through tonight saying, if people are saying, well, I want to approve 5 days, I want to approve with regular verbiage. Well, I'd like to approve 5 days too, but I can't approve with all this without the change in the verbiage. If you're close to all in agreement on the 5 days, you could maybe come to an agreement that you're approving the 5 days and you are approving the verbiage as is, but understanding that the original verbiage, as Janet said, had additional protocols could be developed closer we can start school. As of this point in time, it's strongly recommending, and at least we had stated at this point in time that we were recommending face coverings when physical distancing could be done, and that is a discussion to still be had at a later time if things change. But at this time, the 5 days is letting parents know it's not that, it's strongly recommending, and we'll work on how we can encourage people, but we're not requiring. And we're not requiring even when physical distancing can't be done at this time. And that could change in the weeks to come, right? Another dialogue to have. but at least this is about what we would be informing parents of at this moment. At this moment.
That makes sense to me, given things will change tomorrow, will change next week. I think we need that flexibility to a certain degree, and we'll see how it goes between now and the start of school year.
I don't think it's that simple. I think I could only approve the 5-day a week with the mask. Otherwise, I'd be fighting for the hybrid if we weren't doing masks.
I agree. That's exactly where I am too.
When's registration?
We're gonna charge these guys.
Starts August 1st.
August 1st
First
through the
through the
16th?
First through the
First through the
6th.
16th, right?
16th, I think.
So that's when people are going to want to start knowing what they're registering for.
I think they want to know, to be quite frank. They need to know now. Like, I see them shaking their heads. Like, it's time for us. We have to, I mean, we'll stay here till 1. We all said that. But we kind of need to have some answers. And if not, I understand, but I'd recommend coming back to a special meeting like within 48 hours. Because we've got to start developing things to get communication out to parents so they can get us information again back for us to take our next steps.
Can we vote on the motion that was made and seconded?
Yeah, I mean, that's your guys'. I was just answering the question. Yeah.
Do we have any more discussion or comments, questions before we vote?
So let me understand this. If 2 weeks from now, the staff makes the recommendation that we go to masks where there cannot be physical distancing, we have the authority at that point to do that?
That'd be your guys' discussion about.
Okay, so it would have to come back to us again.
Yeah, it wouldn't be us.
Okay,
We
so I guess with that knowledge, my question would be, what would it take for the three of you that are less concerned about the masks? What would happen, or what could happen between now and 2 weeks from now that would change your opinion on whether or not masks are important when physical distancing can't be maintained?
Looking for a number, or,
I'm just looking for a general reaction.
I mean, if half the county fell over dead tomorrow, then yeah, I mean, I'd be pretty concerned about it.
Let's reverse that. What would make you, in the next 2 weeks, decide that masks are totally unnecessary?
If I saw people generally behaving in a responsible fashion and I saw numbers starting to come down in broader society, you know, part of my apprehension here is that we had numbers turning, and there was a changing moment, and when we faced that changing moment, people had the choice to either continue to behave in a responsible manner, or to go in the other direction. And unfortunately, a lot of people chose to go in the other direction. And so what we've seen is numbers continue to rise.
Yeah, because testing is going up.
But the positivity rate is still higher. Like, they recommend less than 5 for sure, and I've heard that a lot of the countries that have been doing really well, their positivity rate was like 1 to 1.5. Ours, as of 7/20, was 7.26%.
Yeah, and that, without question, more testing has led to increased numbers. However, if you look at the percentage that are testing positive, so what does it take for me to shift my opinion? It's very simple. We need to see the trend change. I can't give you a number. I don't have a specific number in mind. But if we're going to continue to see the percentage of positive cases continue to increase or stay at the same level, and the total number increasing the way it is, my opinion probably won't change. If it turns the way we saw it turning originally, yeah. I mean, I can tell you, my personal example is we were watching baseball this year because my son opted to sit out of baseball because he had concerns. We were at a point in time where we were feeling like he was getting ready to reach back to the team, to join the team as he had been told he could do. Then the numbers began to change in a big way. And so the issue simply comes back to, it's going to take a broader change for me to see that happen. But to come back, I mean, again, the original question, if we're talking about saying, okay, well, we can always come back in a week or two and change this if it makes sense. Well, let's not pretend. If there's nothing that can happen, I know that the trend isn't going to change in the next week or two. That's not how this works. If there's nothing that's going to change in the next week or two that would change your mind on masks, then let's call a spade and say, masks are a non-issue, we're just not concerned. Because I think we need to give a genuine answer to the people that we represent so that they know. If we make the decision tonight to go forward with 5 days and no masks, then I think that tells people what they need to know if they have concerns.
I guess to answer your question, I would have to hear a lot from the community members in general that masks are very important to them. People I've been talking to, that hasn't been the case so far. If that changes in the next few weeks, all right, then let's look at it again.
And I appreciate that, I do. And I don't want to discount that because we represent the community. But I also think that when we have a professional staff that has spent countless hours in task force meetings, researching, I mean, I'd like to consider myself an informed voter, but I can tell you that from the conversations I've heard, I don't hold a candle to having the amount of knowledge that the people on our staff do, not specifically on this. And again, I don't want to discount the community's view because it is important, but it's hard for me to place that even at this point above the professional judgment of our staff. That's what I come back to.
And as a personal, everybody's going to make their choice based on things like that. That's the nature of it. Any other discussion? All right, I think I'll do a roll call vote. Steve?
Voting yes, is going back to the original recommendation. Yes.
Jessica? Yes. Tony?
No.
Bob?
Nope.
I vote yes. Motion carries, and this will be reviewed as we get closer to school starting.
Is that an as needed, or can we set a date to relook at just the mask topic?
I'm sure at the August meeting.
Yeah.
So is that August 3rd?
I'll put it on our board meeting. I mean, we can just keep bringing up COVID-19. We've been kind of doing that.
I'm not leaving. It's too much fun.
So, yeah, we can bring it up at the August 3rd. I mean, we'll keep bringing it up because I think it's a topic that we have to keep bringing up anyways. You know, keep working through the document. We can work through numbers on the communication with families. We can probably, by that point in time, be providing, we might have an idea. I don't know if we will at that point in time, but how many are electing to go virtual on that? Because we probably are going to work that through registration, I would imagine, instead. Or are we going to actually do it in a separate?
Yeah.
It's a long, that's a,
It's what, first or 16th, but I think we need to know before that.
we need to know before that, so we won't just put it through registration. We'll figure it out. So then we can at least talk about how many people have elected to do what. Sure. So, and within that communication, we'll be obviously talking about the 5 days, and then we'll work on bullet points for this, so we can communicate it.
Okay, next item, discussion and consideration of approval of fall athletic season and/or programs.
Before we get to that, we had a couple more motions on A that were necessary.
Oh, yeah, sorry, the calendar being
Yeah,
one.
the calendar and then the cost of items.
Yes, oh, sorry. So, yeah, if we could, so that was under the discussion action consideration, part of the reentry, can we also have a motion in regards to approval of the 2021 calendar with the changes that we stated? And then the next motion we'd like to have is, before you do a motion, is we'd like to review Appendix B, which is related costs. You guys had approved a few items for us to pursue in the last board meeting, but we have some additional now that we've prioritized that we feel we need to move on for us to be able to implement some of the reentry plans. So if we could first have you guys do a motion, a second, and any discussion on the calendar, and then we'll go over the related costs. costs.
I will make a motion to approve the updated calendar as presented.
I'll second.
Any discussion, questions?
Do we have any concern at this point in time? I know somebody at the last, one of the public participation folks at the last meeting raised the issue of the fair and the fact that it's so close to the start of school. I think it's a viable concern.
It was a great concern brought forth, and we had discussion on that, Bob. I had not thought of that until the person brought it up.
Yeah.
And we did have discussion on it, where hence a little bit of the FFA thing
Yep.
from. But then through our dialogue and discussion, what ultimately came out was we did not adjust the calendar on that due to the fact that we said, one, we'd have to go 14 days out if we really wanted to follow some of the requirements. We'd have to go 14 days out from where we originally were going to start. And we said, the issue with that is, okay, so we go 14 days out because of the Walworth County Fair. Good point. But we're like, that's one gathering. People are having gatherings at different, they have options, right? It's their choices. And we're like, we know they're probably gathering elsewhere, and yet we're doing it because of the Walworth County Fair possibly, and saying, maybe we should delay on that. But then there's other gatherings happening. We said, now where do you draw the line for picking and choosing? And so we said, we're staying out of that world.
Okay.
Troy, we have Bluegrass Festival.
Well, and that's the thing, and I guess more than anything
It was
else.
a great point brought up by her.
Yeah, I think we just need to make sure that we present to people that we have thought through it, because you're right. I mean, the fact of the matter is, you look at some Thanksgiving gatherings for families, there's probably more risk at a Thanksgiving gathering for some of the bigger families in East Troy than there is at the Walworth.
And that's what we just said. We're like, we just said, we're like, we don't believe it's our job. And after having a long discussion, I mean, we like talked about it, now we're like, it's not our job. Like, we will never know where to draw this line.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Any other questions on the calendar? All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Related cost?
Yes, you want to take that?
So if you recall, at the end of the reentry plan is Appendix B. If you want to, at some point, take a look at what's been revised. Appendix B has been revised considerably. So I'm going to try to verbally tell you and read you some of the numbers here. If you've got a pencil and paper handy, you want to scratch some of them down, I think that would probably be great. Appendix B, yes, but it's been modified quite a bit from the old paper version, and like when you get home tonight, there's some colors that are highlighting what we think is high priority, and again, that's what I'm going to read you tonight, because what our policy is on spending is basically anything that's outside of regular budgets that's going to come from increasing or that is going to have the effect of increasing our short-term borrowing needs board approval. So anything that's a large extra expenditure basically, and I would say this is a great example of COVID expenditures were 6 months ago not in anybody's budget. It was not, in November when we're planning for the 2021 budget, it was not on the radar. So what we need is, if we're going to move forward with some of these school board approval, and first I'm going to start with what we feel can be done within various department budgets. It totals $17,700, and again, it would be within different department budgets. And what that is classroom first aid kits. So a first aid kit modified with some specific things in every classroom, and that would be coming out of the nurses' budget. There are single room air purifiers that would be done for the nurse and the health isolation rooms. So it would be 8 units, 2 per building essentially, and that would be about $4,800. These are estimates at this time, $4,800 for these single room air purifiers. That would be out of the nurses' budget. Additional needs to help outfit the health and isolation rooms, quantities and types need further investigation, but for example, like curtains that are barriers for these rooms to be able to separate, for example, if 2 children came in, $500 per room. Okay. Again, nurses' budget is what we're looking at there, that the nurses' budget would be able to handle that currently. I just scrolled too far, bear with me here. The next one, within our normal budgets, classroom cleaning kits, which is sanitizer such as peroxide, paper towels, a bucket with food service wipes, gloves, and caddies, about $800 to outfit the classrooms. That would be coming from the building and grounds budget. And I think that is everything that we had that was high. Oh no, I missed one big thing. $10,000, various building materials to have our custodial crew start making some of like the barriers. We, Andy's talking about getting like 1x2s and some laminating film, and again, making some of the barriers. And that's really unknown, but we put a budget of about $10,000 towards that, and he feels he can get that out of the building and grounds budget. So again, those are high priority, and they feel like they can handle that within their own costs. So now the part that we would need your approval on. So the big ticket items and the ones we would not have had regular budget dollars for. So the streaming, so outfitting the classrooms to have the live streaming is estimated to cost $30,000. So we have that expense. 4K, an additional set of Chromebooks basically, so AM and PM don't have to share a Chromebook, and if we do end up having to go virtual, they could have a device per child to take home then. That's $13,600. Substitutes. We are considering trying to hire at least one additional certified teacher per building, anticipating that there will be a lot more substitute needs. Some of the return to work guidance is basically don't come in if you have a fever, get tested. So we will have, we think, a lot more teacher absences. So getting one additional full-time teacher to be ready to be able to fill in where needed helps. Going down the list, we in the plan have the isolation room. We feel that we would be able to staff that with an aide, and we would be hiring those positions. Again, one for each building, cost of approximately $18,000, so that's $72,000 total for the isolation room aides. Okay, you ready? Next one, electrostatic sprayers. So those would be like the disinfecting sprayers. Comes to a total of $7,000 for approximately 10 sprayers. They're about $700 each. If we don't go that route, we are recommending garden pump sprayers. But again, if we do go with the electrostatic sprayers, that's the cost. And then let me just get through the list, and then if you have questions on like what each of them are and what each of them does, absolutely. But like this is one I had questions on, what does it do? Microbial coatings. So microbial coatings for inside the buses, for restrooms, for nurse health rooms, for locker rooms, for the playground equipment, for weight room and fitness center would be approximately $12,500. And again, we'll talk about if you have questions on those. Bottle filling stations. So touchless water bottle filling stations. We would be purchasing 22 of those at about $900 a piece, $19,800. And we are looking at individual hand sanitizer pumps. Estimate about 1,000. That's kind of like those building materials. We're just talking about an open amount. We're not really sure how much that is going to total. But again, right now, vague estimate is about $1,000 there. That list that I just read you, well, let me finish this first. Then there's a couple other items that are mental health related needs, and that we're thinking we can get out of a grant. We have a Title IV federal grant that these things may qualify for, and that includes strengths-based screener for students K-12, some staff training. So just to give you a ballpark, 7,000, 8,000, about 16,000 total that we're hoping to get out of a grant specifically related to mental health and socio-emotional needs. But the list that I read you, that went everything from some additional staffing to sprayers and microbial coatings. We are at 83,900 in stuff, I call it, like supplies and equipment and the technology, and about 312,000 in staffing. So that's about $400,000. That would be like COVID-related one-time expenditures, as hopefully, for the 2021 school year, and then hopefully ending. But so, where do we get this? How do we do this? Again, we do not have enough money in reserves to we don't have a savings account we take this out of, but we would essentially increase our annual short-term borrowing to cover these items. You did end the 1920 school year with a positive variance of about $800,000. That went to reducing the amount we would have to annually borrow this year, reducing the amount of annual short-term borrowing. This would bring it back up by about half of that. So that's again the calculations that kind of occur behind the scenes, and so basically that's what we're looking at this point. Questions?
Everything on here seems reasonable and something that we need to move forward with. It's a scary number, as always.
Is there a chance of getting some, like, pay cares money or anything for this type of
Great
stuff?
question. So it's still in talk stages. There's, I'll get an email here and there that, they're talking about, it's federal when you talk about that. The second round of CARES stimulus money, nothing to my knowledge has been finalized yet. It's supposed to be a July topic. I hear there was a blurb recently, like they were going to attach some strings, like you must open school in order to qualify for a second round. I did, again, hearsay, also read that it might be a smaller amount than was before. Recall our previous amount was $225,000. Portion of that is going to.
I would agree with Ted. I mean, there's nothing on there that sounded frivolous.
The substitutes is the biggest dollar item there, and I think you're absolutely right. It's going to be needed because there will be people that just can't make it at certain times.
And again, we talked about at the last meeting, if things get very bad and there's a lot of subs needed, like one sub didn't help us, right? But at least it's a start of a mitigation point.
So, just so I understand again, so in that situation, if we hired a sub, let's call a permanent sub at Prairie View, is that person then coming in every day with the expectation that they have a role? So conceivably, if we have the problem where we look back and say, boy, our Prairie View staff had a great attendance record, they stayed healthy all year, we would still have that person within the building on a regular basis, so that there would be other ways we could put them to use, whether it's staffing an isolation room on a kid. I mean, they're essentially another full-time staff member that we're adding, and they could work as almost a utility infielder if we needed them to.
Bob, can I interrupt you quick on that?
Yeah.
Two different fold, right? Because you got the isolation room, and we're talking about staffing that.
Yep.
And then we're talking about
That's
substitutes, right?
Yeah.
On the substitute side, when we do look at it like trying to have a substitute in each building, but with the capability of moving district-wide, right, as needed, dependent upon it. But we're looking at hiring qualified, licensed teachers in those substitute roles. So that's why the cost's a little bit more, right?
Right.
And we're looking at, you know, for a year having them, and so we'd have 4 substitutes district-wide. Absolutely on that, what you're describing and depicting, you know, when not needed to sub in a classroom, they're going to be utilized to assist with learning in all of the various aspects. And we would probably, each building level principal is going to need to figure that out, like, when they're not needed, where will they be? And it's not a fill-in, right? That's, we're paying them well, and we plan on doing quality interview practices to get 4 highly qualified candidates. On the isolation room, that's different, where those individuals, and we had a large-scale discussion on it today even. It's a great question by you. And our discussion was, okay, so how do they get utilized if, hopefully, right, they're not having to be used in isolation. But we also said, we gotta be careful there. Because A, we do believe that, you know, just kids are going to be wanting to go down or be sent down for various reasons. Hopefully none related to that, but we'll have to always be checked out. And we don't want that person then necessarily, oh, I've seen 3 kids in the last hour, but I've got this next hour free, and I'm going out in the building. No, you're gonna stay in that area, so.
Okay.
Those will be 1-year contracts for each of them?
So, I don't know if no contract. Even though they're a licensed teacher, I do believe that a substitute does not need to have a contract.
That makes more sense.
Andy, those barriers being built, mass or no mass, is that the plan?
So because of the decision of the board, I mean, it's, again, just the master strongly recommended. But we still identified areas that we need to manufacture barriers. So again, that's just the STEAM and STEM labs, the keyboarding labs, circular tables, that sort of thing. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
I would like to make the motion to approve the adjustments to Appendix B as Kathy presented them.
I'll second.
Okay. Discussion?
Some of these things we should have done a long time ago, before this. I mean, the bottle fillers, we should probably have those, like microbial services, some of those things we probably should have done. And we had funding.
There's the key statement, Steve. There's the key statement.
Well, and I mean.
And we don't have the funding now, right? I mean, you're having to still make a decision on, we've already utilized what we had for the CARES and primarily into our HVAC upgrades, right? Now, this is still about, if we don't get additional funding, as Tony referenced, right? This is coming from our budget right now.
Well, and I hope that's something the public understands, is that, you know, we've talked about the structural deficit up until now. If what they want is 5-day a week or 5-day a week school, this is the cost that comes with it.
Sure.
And there's no amount of fancy number configuring that we can do to fix this. You know, so. Yeah.
And that's, I mean, I'm not trying to be pessimist, but I mean, people need to understand these are beginning recommendations of possibly cost impacts. So.
All right. All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Anything else on item A tonight?
I don't think so.
All right. Item B. Discussion and consideration of approval of fall athletic season and programs.
Would you like me to start reading the letter or not? Do you want to start with,
Yeah.
does that help? All right. So obviously, you might be like, really athletics? Yeah, really athletics. Athletics is a big part of, obviously, just like obviously clubs. And when we're talking about athletics, one of the things is, as you'll see what Reed's talking about tonight, is we're not really just talking about athletics, right? Athletics is a component of it, but we're talking about clubs and we're talking about other extracurriculars and other additional activities outside of the school day. So it's broadened. But one of the things that we wanted to bring to your attention first and foremost is there's a letter going to WIAA. It's already been sent from the Rock Valley superintendents and Southwestern superintendents originally were developing a lot of it. And we got on board with it, and many superintendents throughout the state now have sent similar letters to the WIA. The rationale behind it is the WIA, and I'm not being critical, nothing is easy right now, nothing. But the WIA stated right that it's local decisions. And we're like, well, it's kind of a broader thing than that in a way, but okay. So we kind of got together locally a little bit. As we discussed as superintendents, we said, yeah, this letter is fine, we can send it. If it doesn't put us in any issue where I'd be like, oh, I want to check with our board. That's what Reed's presenting tonight is like, we need some direction from the board on certain things. That's why we're bringing this up to you. What the letter does was, and I was fine with it coming from the superintendents, and I did already sign it, and we sent it off, was it's asking the WIA to strongly consider not having fall sports and postponing them and moving them to the spring at least. So basically fall sports for this year would become spring sports, and spring sports would become summer sports next year. And the winter sports we'll deal with when we get to the winter, and whether or not they start on time or not, and all those things. The rationale was this, and let me just read it so you have an idea. Dear Mr. Anderson, that's Wayne Anderson, the WIA lead. The superintendents of the Rock Valley Conference, and this is very similar to what other conferences have said, have had the opportunity to meet and discuss the planning of the upcoming 2021 athletic season. I am sure you are inundated with feedback at this point, and we would be remiss if we did not represent our own positions. Well, just like you have been going through, we are sure you are being faced with some critical decisions in the coming days. We respectfully ask you to consider the plan that is circulating via throughout many CISAs and the schools related in Southwest Wisconsin originally. We feel this plan makes the most sense for all members of the WIA. We are a member organization forcing members to choose between the safety of our student athletes and whether or not we should immediately compete in order to appease others is simply irresponsible. Local control is a concept that works in some situations. It makes no sense in this situation. Local control and the service to a member organization are clearly at odds when it comes to the middle and high school sports this season. The members of the Rock Valley Conference and other conferences are asking you to weigh what is right for all student athletes and to strongly consider and ultimately approve this alternate plan. Delaying the start of athletics until the winter season, shifting the fall to the spring and spring to the summer, strikes the balance for our member schools. This needs to be an all-in approach, and your position as a leader makes it necessary to make these difficult decisions. We are all faced with extremely difficult plans this year. We are all trying to figure out how to safely bring our students back. Thrusting athletics into the center of that process only creates further anxiety and issues for all of us at this time. Let us start with figuring out the student part of the student athlete before the focus on the athletics. You will undoubtedly hear other voices that think things should just move forward and as though this pandemic maybe doesn't even exist. It is here. If it is not in local communities yet, it will be. At a time when professional sports, college sports, so many other athletic organizations have had to delay their own plans, there is simply no reason that the WIA should not consider doing the same for us. Respectfully submitted to superintendents. The emphasis of it was, plain and simply, we're not trying to cancel anything. We're actually trying to say, don't force us to have that conversation. Let us just postpone it, but we need your assistance to do it. And let us focus on getting the reentry plan started. Let us see how those reentry plans go for September, October, November. We're going to learn a lot. And then we can have some discussions and hopefully still provide these opportunities for our kids in a safe manner. So there was supposed to be a meeting today, it got delayed, and now it'll be on Thursday with the WIA. We're hoping that they decide on Thursday whether or not what to give us direction on. And if it's accepted, it makes our lives a little easier, to be quite frank, and we won't have to have as many decisions made. What we're bringing up tonight, Reed would like to go over, is if they don't accept it, what do we need to do next? Because that's kind of the discussion that a whole bunch of the superintendents want to meet with on Friday, and that is if they don't accept, what? And not that everybody has to do everything as a district, as an organization together. I firmly have said that to a couple of our surrounding superintendents, that look, each community and district has to decide this a little differently based upon their community and district and mitigation measures that is being done. And we are in agreement on some things, and we're not in full agreement maybe on a few other things about, like, should it be an all cancellation or some cancellation if sports, if they don't accept this. And there's different varying levels of why or why not that should be considered. So I told the surrounding troops in Rock Valley, I'm not making that decision. I said, we're gonna bring it to our board and we're gonna have a discussion. I jokingly said to a couple new superintendents, I would highly recommend you go to your board too and have a discussion and not be making this as a solo. So tonight, that's what we want to talk about is if the WIAA does not accept this, what next for East Troy?
Reed, before you start, can you just quick say which sports are fall, spring, and summer? I could probably figure out, but you could probably rattle it off.
They're right in the re-entry packet,
Oh,
Tony,
they are?
on page 30, 31.
So fall, football, girls tennis, boys soccer, boys and girls cross country, cheer, football, volleyball, I don't know if I'm repeating.
Girls tennis, did you say? Sorry.
Girls tennis, if I didn't say that. Golf, I'm missing golf.
Well, on 30, 31, it's right there too, and what I like repeating the numbers from last year too. So you can kind of have an idea of the numbers.
So yeah, so really it's three different options. Option number A is allowing all activities. I'm going to try and not say athletics because I do think it needs to be an activity focus. Though a lot of the information I am getting is from the WIAA and athletics, I do think it's going to also drive after-school activities that we have, FFA, or musicals, plays, band, things like that. Those are all happening after school, and I think it would be unfair if we separated athletics and those other extracurricular activities. So I just wanted to mention that first. But so one is allowing all fall after-school activities. Second one would be allowing partial fall after-school activities, and the third one would be not offering fall after-school programs. So the first one, if we were to offer after-school activities, some mitigation measures that could be taken. Additionally, would we want to discuss a requirement of face masks? Knowing that athletics and after-school activities is a privilege and not a right, so there is additional guidelines that we have in place for those individuals already, whether it's grades, our code of conduct, things like that. So that's one additional thing we can do that would help support our cohort model that we presented to you, because quite frankly, if we're trying to cohort our students and then we have a football team with 60 kids, a cross-country team with 60 kids, that's really kind of interfering with that cohort that we're trying to maintain. So that's one thing. Again, it's not something that, it's just ideas that we have, and I'd like to discuss and have a discussion with you. Another thing that we had discussed is requiring virtual learning for all of our student athletes that want to be in a sport. And again, activity, excuse me. Again, this would go in line with that cohort model. If they were in a sport and did it virtually, then the potential of infection of COVID-19 is going to increase if they are having competitions with other schools. But if they were to do an all virtual model, they would not be bringing that into the buildings themselves. So that's something we had talked about. If they were to go in person, we wanted to do a blend of the high, moderate, and low protocols that the WIAA has put into place already or given to us. Guidelines, I should say. Another thing that we had talked about, and quite honestly, my opinion is I think this one makes the most sense, and that would be that we have a Rock Valley Conference only competition. Looking earlier this morning, we had an AD meeting, we had a COVID task force, so I'm representing Walworth County, and then we have an AD from all the other 4 counties. And we talked about this briefly, but with everything unknown, we hadn't made a final determination. But the theory is really what the Big Ten Conference is doing. If I look and pulled up my schedule for our 6 sports that we have, cross country, volleyball, and tennis. You look at those, we're going and having contact with, amongst all six of us, almost 100 other schools. So almost 100 other districts that East Troy alone is coming in contact with just for the fall season. And then you multiply that by 10, obviously there's going to be some cross there. We figure there's going to be over half of the schools in the state of Wisconsin that the Rock Valley will come in contact with sometime. If we do Rock Valley Conference only competition, that lowers that number of 200 to 300 to 10. So again, that's a huge risk mitigation right there. That also, that keeps us eligible for postseason. That once we qualified for postseason, you're moving on from team to team. That just really lowers it. It reduces the frequency of exposure. And then lastly, one thing that we had also talked about is regular health screenings for coaches and players. Is that something we wanted to discuss? And I think I skipped over this, but an additional screening upon the completion of the school day. Our athletic trainer does have something through Aurora where they would scan a QR code and do something very similar to what they're doing right now with our open gyms and contact days, just a little health screening. So those are additional measures that we would take, could put into place. The second one would be allowing for partial fall activities. So if we were to do that, again, additional mitigation measures would be expected. The additional screening is something that we would like to see. Again, the face mask discussion, when physical distancing is not possible. We would like to follow the low risk, moderate risk, and high risk guidance per county. If you see that, and Dr. Hibner and I we were having a conversation, so there's really two separate low, moderate, and high risk conversations out there. There are sports that are low risk, moderate risk, and high risk, and then there are guidelines for communities that are low risk, moderate, and high risk. So to just clarify that, we would be following the guidelines for our community. Currently, we are a high risk county. So with that, we would follow those guidelines under a high risk county, which is, at this point in time, we would not allow any athletics to occur based off of that. If we were to move into moderate risk, then our low risk sports could start competitions. And then if we moved into low risk or moderate risk, competitions could start. And if we moved to lowest risk or high risk, competitions could start. Middle school discussion, we had talked about considering intramurals for our middle school athletics specifically. It avoids transportation issues, reduces cross participation with other districts. So our middle school is in the Southern Lakes Conference for middle school. So that is us, Elkhorn, Delavan, Whitewater is in that, Waterford. I might be missing one there, but it keeps opportunities for kids to compete. So essentially, it could be just a intramural program that would be after school for those kids. And then lastly would be no fall after school programs. And really there's two components to that we could look into, and that would be just no opportunities whatsoever, or we could do practices or meetings within those activities based off of the low risk, moderate risk, and high risk guidance. Yeah, go ahead.
Are those all the options? I don't want to interrupt you.
Yep.
So I just want to state too, some people might be, and I totally understand. Some people, I mean, Ree and I have been working on this for a while, and we've gone full circle on a lot of things. I mean, and something tomorrow could make us go full circle again in a different way. But I do understand if you're hearing this for the first time, people might be like, are you serious? You're talking about athletics? Did you just hear the discussion tonight? And you're talking about athletics? Like, where are you guys? I want people to understand where we're at is all we're trying to do is talk about from an aspect of we're trying to meet the original objective, and that is we're trying to say, can we balance it some way, somehow? We're not saying we know we can or can't, but we're saying can we? Because remember the original objective we said was physiological and psychological, that we want to help students in activities for good mental health too, along with the physical component. And the data itself is astonishing. Like when Reed and I were listening to the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine, and they were talking about just the anxiety, right? They were talking about the depression. They were talking about the overall health and historically the perspectives. And if people are wondering, like, what are those numbers? I mean, 65% of student athletes have reported symptoms of anxiety, and mild, moderate, severe. I didn't get in it. Mild, moderate, or severe. 40.3 to 11.7, 13.4. The historically, in an average of just depression alone, historically it was 9.7 of moderate to severe, and now it's up to 33.4%. 9.7 to 33.4%. And that's historically to what they've just witnessed from March to May alone. And so our component is, we just don't want to dismiss it. We've never dismissed, obviously, social, emotional, and mental health of well-being of kids, but we're trying not to dismiss activities. And I'm not talking again athletics, activities, right? Activities are just vitally important. And so we're trying to say, and I just don't want to be that district or that superintendent, and anybody who knows me knows that says, what's the easy thing to do? Nobody wants to take the easy thing. I don't believe any district does. But I also want us to work diligently. Reed knows that I have directed him time and time again when he's been going to the conferences, like, don't allow people to take the easy route here. Hard discussions, hard conversations, and we'll see where it goes. But just don't allow the easy route, because the easy route is to go, we can't do it. I mean, because look what we're trying to do with schools. And I go, just share this data and then go tell kids that we can't do it. Because this isn't about what kids just like to do. This is about their mental health. This is not just about what they like to do. So I just want us to make sure we're trying to do anything and everything possible. Hence where all these varying options and just ideas are coming up. So if you're like, wow, that was a lot of different options and ideas, that's why, right? And it's a broad spectrum to not having them, to only having the ones that are low-risk sports that would probably meet all the requirements of not having the providing unnecessary exposure and probably mitigating the spread, to another option of doing them all, but with a lot of boundaries in, right? So there's a wide variety, and that's why we're bringing it up, to have a little guidance. Because like I said on Friday, if the WIAA doesn't approve of our request to give us time to be framed, then decisions do have to be made. Like fall sports are here, right? And people need to be told, what are you doing with fall sports? And as a conference, we kind of need to know what each kind of board and district is deciding of a tentative plan. And I'll be honest, the discussions before tonight were, hey, if the WIAA doesn't approve, are we going to all cancel sports? And some people have said, well, yeah, maybe. I mean, based upon this reason or this reason, and all legit, all very legit. I will tell you, I said, I'm not so quick to do that right off the bat, because I said I think there are certain sports, by all means, that are very low risk, that have been identified as low risk, that you can do without necessarily exposure or mitigating the spread. You know, I think very quickly of golf and tennis being two obvious ones. And people are like, well, how do you do tennis? You know, people always try to say that to me. Well, you got to touch the same ball. No, you don't. You don't touch the same tennis balls. You got to be creative. What you do is you sign 3 tennis balls with my name on it. Ted signs his 3. And you know what? Nobody ever touches theirs except their own. So when I'm serving mine. He serves his. And you never touch them. And if you know anything about tennis and played your whole life, you don't do it oftentimes anyways. You lift it up with your foot in the rack and you throw it. I do a whole match without ever touching a ball except on my serve. So that's because of my age more than anything. I can't bend over. But my point is there are a lot of creativity on certain things. But I don't want people going, I can't believe you're discussing athletics and you're not just here. We're discussing it, I hope people understand after explaining that, for the right reasons. All right, for the right reasons. The question is what we need guidance on. If you want to ask Reed, ask him his opinions on it. He has some strong ones, and he's thought this through. But would be, where do you guys feel on all of it?
Question for you, Reed. So this is the direction that we are going to take. Have the ADs in the conference had any discussions about, well, what happens if? I mean, obviously, and I'll pick on Whitewater just as an example. If Whitewater ends up having a COVID outbreak and they have to take any sort of measures to adjust, that would seem to be an indication that if we had an athletic event planned with them, that athletic event probably is canceled, and there's going to be a protocol within the conference as to how you handle that.
So Whitewater has an outbreak, we are supposed to play them next week. That would be a forfeit. So part of, again, I don't want to always go back to this, but again, if we were a Rock Valley Conference contest only conference, we would have that as a forfeit. If we played Whitewater last week and they have an outbreak this week, we have the opportunity to say there was an outbreak against Whitewater, we should get tested. Our teams that came into contact with Whitewater should get tested. Those results would get back, hopefully prior to our next contest. If we were to do Rock Valley, we would have a week separation, very similar to what you would see in a football season, which typically you don't see.
Yeah.
So.
That's a good, I hadn't thought about that, but that's a really good point.
And I don't need to bring this up yet, I mean, we've talked all about that, if we can limit the number of, providing opportunities, but limiting it, right? Not only about exposure to other districts and all the tracing you have to worry about and do, but the other thing would be it allows more weeks, right? So if something like that occurred, it allows more weeks to flexibility to scheduling. And some of those sports, as we know, some of our sports has multiple games in a week. We would want to be trying to look at, I'm not saying, right, Reed's got to talk that through, but we're trying to look at, we've had these discussions of not doing multiple, because then too many teams are crossing, right? Give ample time between events and all those type of things. So those are the type of adjustments we know we would need to make and do. The other thing is, I know I didn't see any reactions. I was trying not to look at that, but Reed was saying it politely because I know a couple of my suggestions to him were off the chart, and he's like, "Oh, you want me to really share that all out?" But was like that virtual learning. Again, I know it's off, but again, it's us just trying to be creative. Like if people are worried about kids doing something that maybe has got a higher risk, and then they're also going to be in the school building, maybe there should be discussions of that. We're not saying we're recommending it, right? But we wanted to get your take on it, right? Or, and I'm really not trying to bring up a hot topic tonight. I thought it was great dialogue. It wasn't a hot topic. But, or is it those students have elected to now do activities, and activities that have a higher risk, that's all been shown. So they are wearing face coverings when they're in school. Like, hey, you went out for the sport, you know you're having a higher risk because you're interacting, you're going to wear a face covering in our building. Like, is that something? And I'm not trying to, but those are the things we're trying to work through to determine how we can maybe provide opportunities for these kids and activities too. So thoughts, ideas, because anything that you would want me to take back to a Friday discussion with surrounding soups would be, and Reed with his ADs would be greatly appreciated. I mean, were you at all opposed, and if you were, I apologize, of the letter that all of us superintendents sent to the WIAA asking for a little relief?
I think it's fantastic. I actually saw that story someplace, and my first thought was that it was nice that it was the Rock Valley Conference that was initiating that discussion, because it was creative and it was outside the box, and superintendents, staff, ADs who worked together on that, I thought it was fantastic. I want to commend you all for the work you did on that, because that's exceptional.
Reed, I see both A and B have face masks required when physical distancing is not possible.
Yeah, again, these are just, do we want to require that face mask? So if we were to do partial, it would be for those sports that are able to compete, would we want to require a face mask for that? It's not, it's just discussion.
Do you have a recommendation, what you feel?
I think it would be wise for just knowing that you're in real close contact. I think it would be wise and help mitigate risk if those face masks were
you have the statement from Dr. McGuine to the State Assembly, and that information, again, is not information that he started collecting in March. It's historical data that we can compare where their mental well-being has been from this, at that point in time, it was through May, and the changes that we've seen is alarming. I think it's really important, not just from an athletic standpoint, but from the kid that wants to go to an after-school NAHS meeting or go to our fall musical and work with that. Again, there are going to be mitigation things that we need to put into place, but I'm not wearing my just athletic only hat. It's a majority of our kids are in some sort of programming here at the high school. So I think A is, if the WIAA says that they're having sports as normal, I think A is our best option, and I think that coupled with Rock Valley Conference only competition is our best option.
Did you see the tweet that WIAA just put out 2 hours ago? Did you see that about?
What did they say, Steve?
They said WIAA Board of Control have a special business meeting to address the fall sports and consider proposals submitted by school administration from the southwest portion of the state.
Yeah, so that's the meeting on Thursday that they're having. Yep. I do want to just mention one thing. I would only be on board for the Rock Valley Conference only if that was a conference-wide decision. I think if the conference as a whole said that's pointless, then Whitewater's still seeing 100 schools, Jefferson's still seeing 100 schools, they're still coming to East Troy. So if that were the case, I guess I would argue that if we're seeing a couple other non-conference schools, a lot of them crossing over, I don't know if that would be as big of a benefit to do that.
It's kind of like all or nothing. If Rock Valley agrees we're in, they don't.
Reed, do you believe that'll, I don't mean to put you in a spot, but you have discussions with ADs, I have discussions with soups a lot. We all try to view it from different lenses, right, and everything. Do you believe that that'll actually be more the discussion, or do you think it'll be more the discussion of to offer or not to
I
offer?
think it really depends on what comes Thursday. I think if Thursday comes, I do think that we'll have a few teams in our conference or a few schools in our conference that won't want to have athletics. I gave the second part is kind of a synopsis of what Dr. Hibner went over, and it's already out of date, being dated yesterday. So the Big 8 conference today came out and canceled all of their fall activities. And I texted Dr. Hibner and showed him that, and I said, it's kind of exactly opposite of ideally what I would like to see, where they canceled all their conference, but they're leaving it open to non-conference contests.
I'm not trying to be critical. I thought it would just be a full broad cancellation when I first read it.
Right.
And then I saw that non-conferences are still open. So and again, maybe it's a point of emphasis to the WIAA, like we are making a decision. You need to support us right now to help for us to have a different opportunity later. And there might be that. I'm not being critical of any conference or anybody making decisions. That's the last thing I want to be. So.
Yeah, it's just it just came out, and it was interesting to say the least. But certainly, I know that if I were to sit in on those meetings, I'm sure that I would have a different perspective, and my perspective changes every day, to be quite honest. And their majority of them are Madison schools, which that's a whole different can of worms that they're dealing with. So I certainly understand that.
Orders and everything. So
Right.
That's a whole different. I think to be quite frank, honestly, I think a lot of the county schools are looking at just the order, and they're trying to operate within the order that they're under. So that changes their outcomes because they don't have necessarily the same dialogue and discussions that maybe we're having in different counties, because their county order is more stringent. So they can't have as much, they're not having as much dialogue on that. We really, I mean, keep talking, please, because if you think we're nuts, but Rita and I are, and I can tell you the whole administrative staff feels this way. We're concerned about kids in activities and not having activities, not having anything. Those numbers will not trend the way we want if they continue not to have opportunities. They will not.
Totally agree with that.
They need that interaction. They need face to face, whether it is through sports or through musicals or through being in the Art Honor Society. Like, they need that community that they can only find here at school. And it's up to us to provide that for them.
I'll make a motion to go with Reed's recommendation for A, allow all fall after-school activities with Rock Valley only.
If that works.
If that works.
And with all the mitigation measures and everything else that would be getting put into place.
I'll second that.
We're still gonna do the required virtual classes, and then we're okay with that?
Well, it was just an idea in there. I don't know what, I mean, do you want us to explore that?
Fine.
Do you like that thought?
No, we're talking about A, right? Isn't that what you're
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's part of A.
Yeah.
So, I apologize, those were all just topics, ideas that I wanted to go over. So virtual, if it was all virtual, if you look, the next one is students learn in person. So I think that would be a decision that would need to be made, is whether or not we would expect students to go virtually or face to face. So could I suggest an amendment that in that heading point, additional mitigations could take place for this to happen. Options might include, but are not exclusive to, because the way it's written now, it's.
Yeah.
I like that a lot, Bob.
I'm good with that.
And the reason, and I like that for a lot of reasons, I like it due to the fact some of those ideas, and they're just strictly like ideas to show that we have thought.
Yeah.
I mean, if virtual would be pursued, I can tell you the next step that tomorrow, Rita and I will be reaching out to Shana. Talk about, let's talk about this idea, right? Because there might be some things where, no, that idea just can't come to fruition.
Well, the fact of the matter is, you might wake up at 3 a.m. after seeing a story tonight on CNN, and there may be something we need to add to this list.
That's right.
I don't think we want to limit ourselves to anything reasonable at this point.
Can I clarify the motion? I'm sorry. I have Ted Zess made a motion to approve recommendation A, allowing all after-school events with the RVCC. Is that correct?
And then let's add that verbiage of
On point 4, where it says additional mitigations could take place for this to happen, options, and then insert the word either may or might include, but are not exclusive to, and then the options.
With might include, but are not exclusive to.
Basically removing it from being a restrictive statement to being a more open
very
statement.
fluid document.
And then what point was it under?
It's under point 4, so in section A, the 4th bullet point.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, any other discussion? All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, one more item, staffing recommendations.
I don't even know if we have any. I put it on there just due to the fact of the time of year, and it's pretty common. So do we not have any tonight?
No.
All right.
I'll second that.
Are you going to take resignations or just recommendations?
Just recommendations on the agenda.
Okay,
So we'll have to wait till the 3rd on that one.
thank you.
Nobody else can resign.
We're not going to meet again until next May.
All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Thank you for coming again tonight.
Thank you all.